Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячий хотар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The lead street army sends its regards.
everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 266 of the stream. And man, has today been a huge news day.
And of course, when we leave on Monday and we come back on Tuesday, almost everything in the world happens and the roof caves in, and this week is no exception, as it appears that a very serious situation has now started to evolve on the Polish-Ukrainian border as a missile slammed down into a farm field, killing 2 farmers, and leaving Poland with the question of, did the Russians fire this missile, and was it an intentional firing? We can see right here, according to this, and let me get it to load real quick. We can see a picture of where one of the missiles cratered the land. We can also see that somehow, by almost pure misfortune, a Polish farmer was driving their tractor in the exact same area that this missile exploded. Now, I have seen a couple of comments on this picture before we go and start dissecting this thing completely. I have heard some people say that this picture is actually not of the Russian cruise missile, or whatever missile it was, that landed in Poland and exploded. Then others are saying that it is, and from what I can tell and based off of pictures, although we cannot confirm it 100%, I'm around 80% sure that this is the picture of the farm field that was hit by the missile, and this is the tractor, and most likely where the farmer, one of the farmers was, that suffered the fatal injury. With this in mind, it appears that we're on a very serious path. Right now, the Security Council inside of Poland is convening and seeing if it's necessary to invoke Article 4 of the NATO Charter. And just in case if any of y'all may need a little bit of a refreshing on what the NATO Charter is, we actually have it right here on stream tonight on this little link. If you want to click on that link or any of the links that we show during the entire night of news, you can find the description for that you can find the link for that in the description below the video. It should be the one at the very bottom. But moving on over to the actual NATO Charter, just in case if any of those of y'all don't know what Article 4 is, and we've never really covered it on stream either, Article 4 is about the shortest article in the entire Charter. And Article 4 lays out that the parties will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened. This means that Article 4, if it's invoked here within the next few hours, will be invoked over the territorial integrity clause of the Charter because Russian missiles, of course, landed within the Polish borders and exploded, killing 2 farmers. This could lead from Article 4 on into Article 5, if all parties involved deemed that that attack was an attack upon Polish sovereignty by the Russian government through Russian weaponry. But this moves us on into an entirely separate issue, and this one is probably one of the most pressing ones here. Some people are claiming, and it appears that the United States is not wanting to come out with a sure statement, neither are the Polish, that this missile was actually Russian. They say that it was clearly of Russian origin, as in if its construction and its design is Russian in its base, but they're not clearly coming out and saying that it was a Russian missile. This could be for multiple reasons, but the two I'm seeing that are most evident are these. One, we're trying to see if we can avoid an escalation of the conflict where the entirety of the NATO alliance gets involved, or two, they're not really sure at this moment, in all seriousness, whether that missile was Russian or not. It has been circling around, from what I can tell, that the missile may have been Ukrainian. But, although I didn't include this on tonight's news, I did see some supposed pictures of some of the fragments of this missile that exploded, and it appears that the missile fragments line up with those that you would find on a Caliber missile after it exploded in Kyiv, that also exploded in this area. None of the parts appear to be similar to an S-300 missile, which is one that is also being purported to be Ukrainian that may have misfired and strayed into Polish territory and then exploded. I'm finding that to be highly unlikely. Also, based off, also just another thing, from what we've heard today, no Russian cruise missiles were even hitting the west of Ukraine. They were mostly, if not all of them, were hitting the eastern area of Ukraine around the Kyiv all the way down to Kherson area, although Kherson was not directly hit as far as I know today. But this is still quite serious, and y'all may see that I'm not really in the hyped up chipper tone that I usually am, And that's because this could start to escalate into a situation where we could get involved, the United States, along with the rest of the Western world. In fact, all of our viewers, pretty much all of y'all, 54% of y'all are from the United States. The remainder of about the 30% of the rest of you are from English-speaking countries like Australia, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Canada. And then the remainder of the other 20% are from other countries like Germany. Most of them, however, are in Europe or in North America, and almost all of our viewers are within the NATO sphere. And so it is a little bit more serious tonight in the news coverage, especially of this particular instance, because this one picture right here and how it's handled here in the future over the next coming days could determine whether we begin to directly enter the war or if we continue supporting Ukraine the way we have so far. I'm not going to air my personal opinions until the final verdict is delivered as to what really happened here and whether it's worth provocation or not, but it is still quite a serious issue considering that 2 Polish citizens were killed and these Russian missiles did land in Polish territory. This is the first time ever, over the course of the entire war, around 9 months, that any kind of projectile from the Russo-Ukrainian war has landed within NATO borders. And so this is a situation that has no precedent. We can't even go off of previous instances in this war to say what will be happening in the future. So hopefully, the people who are currently discussing this matter come to the right conclusions and make sure not to compromise our own integrity of the NATO alliance, but still, it's incredibly interesting to see. I actually saw that Martin R. said that Lviv was hit today, and if that is true, and that is the case, Lviv is still quite a distance from the border, and if we get out a ruler on our normal map and measure from Lviv to this area north, and I believe, if I'm correct, these markers may be a little incorrect, the missile hit somewhere in this area. So let's get out a ruler and let's measure how far that is. From Lviv to this area is about 40 miles of deviation. And that is a massive amount of distance for a missile to fly. These caliber missiles, if it is a caliber missile, fly at around 400 to 500 miles an hour. They're not particularly fast. They're not breaking any speed records. And so it would take about 10 minutes, if I'm doing the math, well, a little bit less, around 8 minutes for it to travel from Lviv all the way to this direction. Or, I guess you could say its flight path would have been so altered, so different, that it wouldn't have even been going for Lviv. It would have been going on an entirely different flight path because they usually fly in a fairly straight line, of course, accounting for the Earth's circumference. It's not a flat map, it's a globe. But anyways, moving on from that, it's still a very pressing issue, a very serious one. And if we get any news as the stream continues, we're going to make sure to report on it immediately, considering that this may lead us into war. But with that, now moving on from the serious news and on into the fun news, because that's what we're all here for. We're here to see the Ukrainians obliterating the Russians again today, because while the Russians always have dreams and ambitions on taking on the West, we can see that when the reference of it even happening comes up, they're quite scared. And that's never out of the question. They're pissing their pants right now, even having the reference that they may have launched that missile, and if they did, then they ought to be scared for sure. But moving on to Moscow, we can see that in response to what's happened today, or just in the normal wheelings and dealings of Russian propagandists, they brought on a drunk Russian on a TV. And so let's see about what this drunk Russian is saying. And this guy sounds drunk, so let's just play the video and I'll let y'all hear it for yourselves.
Я надеюсь, что, может, это тайный план по заманиванию. То есть...
This guy is talking in such slurred freaking speech that you can tell it even though he's speaking a foreign language. Like, I don't know about you, Matthew, but this guy is also dressed up like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo.
He really is, and he's like, he doesn't look like he belongs on a TV show.
No, he doesn't. He honestly looks like he's about to look to one of the reporters and go, "Блядь, Scooby."
He looks like he just woke up.
Honestly, he does.
Ты говоришь, что скорее всего это ловушка.
Да.
Вот произошла вот эта вот
Сейчас я о
история.
более глобальном заманивании. Ты что? Сейчас мы показываем, что мы не можем сопротивляться войскам НАТО. Значит, войска НАТО, уже потеряв все берега, переходят границы Польши, Словакии, Чехии и все остальное.
Wait. What? what's this guy talking about? And he sat there and said, right now, we've proven that we cannot defend ourselves. And so NATO troops are flooding into Poland. Like, that's not a part of NATO. Like Polish troops are NATO troops. What is he talking about? That's like saying, no, the U.S. troops are flooding into Alabama. Well, duh, it's part of the United States. That's where they go. That's where they're from.
Выполняют Украину.
Так.
И тут мы их всех уничтожаем, ну, чем-то таким.
And then we destroy all of them. You know, they go into Poland, then we destroy all of them. We can't destroy the Ukrainian army, but the NATO soldiers are just easy. You know, they're just easy to take out. We'll just swat them off the face of the earth. This guy is drunk, because only a drunk could believe this kind of lunacy.
Бабами, напалмом, и они в испуге убегают обратно. Ну, потому что другого плана у меня нет. Честно говоря, потому что грустно, ну грустно.
And with that, that's the end of that video. But once again, I just wanted to show y'all a quick little clip, because I gotta be honest with y'all. I think we're not looking at Scooby-Doo right here, Matthew. I think we're looking at Tony. I think Tony survived the car crash, and now he's drunk because he's living with the guilt of what he's done, and they brought him as a guest onto Russian TV. That's the only thing I can go with, because his kind of logic and reasoning here about what the Russians are doing just sounds like stupidity. But anyways, with that, it's time for us to now move on from the Moscow area. And it's now time for us to move on down towards Kyiv, because while, of course, the news is always generally good these days, and we haven't been able to cover this, of course, because we usually just cover the frontline news, but the G20 summit has occurred over the previous few days. And the G20 summit just came to a close about several hours ago, almost a day ago, somewhere in between several hours to a day ago. And at the exact same time that the G20 summit was coming to an end, and by the way, the entirety of the G20 summit was condemning the Russians for the current war in Ukraine, the Russians immediately began a relentless missile campaign against the Ukrainians again. This is about the fourth or fifth one of the war, and so far, this one appears to be the largest in size. And keep in mind this is very important to keep in mind. We already know that the Russians are running out of missiles. We determined that the last time a large missile attack occurred in Ukraine, that they only had, I believe, around 900 to 1,200 cruise and ballistic missiles total, and they had already used up about 2/3 of them. And so we don't know how many missiles were included in this missile attack today, but we can get a generally good idea that they're almost dwindling on completely empty in their missile reserves. And so with that, I'm going to show y'all something real quick, because I believe this is important to show. I don't know about y'all, but I always consider it very important to show what Russian weaponry is capable of. And the best thing we've seen them being capable of course, is getting shot down. And so here's a video of a Russian caliber flying over the Kyiv region, somewhere probably in between Chernihiv and Kyiv, and being shot out of the sky by Ukrainian air defense on film. And so, here's the video. And you see it flying over. Oh my lord.
Dang.
That was a good shot. Let's watch that one more time. Oh my lord, you can actually see.
That was impressive.
That was really impressive. You can even see right there that it had taken such damage that it already started to tumble. It most likely destroyed itself just due to it falling out of its airfoil. But that was quite a shot. That was one hell of a pull right there that the Ukrainians were able to do. I don't know how that missile somehow made its mark to the rear of that caliber, but that was a 1 in 1 million shot right there. So let's watch that thing one more time. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but Ukrainian air defenses are working quite well right now. Now, we might want to throw up a poll on that, because some people may disagree. I mean, you know, no, that video doesn't really speak for itself all too well. You know, there is a little bit of room for improvement. I guess the missile could have blown the thing out of the sky on just a single shot, and it couldn't have even flown further. But, you know, to me, it seems like it did a fairly good job, but I might be biased. With that, we're
Now, what are the stats so far? There were 100 missiles that came into Ukraine, and they shot down, what was it, 60 or 70 of them?
I've heard a number anywhere in between 70 to around 77 or 78. So it seems that...
Now, that's impressive if that's actually an accurate number.
We are not entirely sure if that is an accurate number. That's one thing that's always hard to confirm with these missile attacks, because we can't individually confirm on video or picture evidence each of these individual missiles being shot down. But right now, if that number is true, that means that the Ukrainians were able to shoot down over 2/3 of all of the missiles that were launched in Ukraine. That means that out of every 3 missiles, only one of them reached their target. The other 2 were shot down and destroyed before they could even reach them, which is quite a fair number. However, while that number still stands and it seems incredible, we have seen that some missiles have hit Kyiv. We can see some burning apartments because, of course, the Russians don't target anything in particular with these incredibly expensive and highly dwindling missiles at this point for the Russians, considering they only have about several hundred of them left. No, they don't attack major infrastructure with these things. Most of the time, they usually end up attacking civilian buildings, as we can see this apartment building in Kyiv smoldering from the flames of a missile that slammed into the side of it. With that, that's the end of the video, but I gotta say, the Russians really do need to pay for what they've been doing. Especially, considering from the Western standpoint, considering that Matthew and me are from the United States, and most of y'all are either from the United States or a European nation. If it does come to be that that missile that landed within Poland was a Russian missile, and that it was practically deliberately guided to that target, for whatever reason, I don't know why it would have targeted a farm field, but I guess the Russians may be trying to send a very subtle message. I believe that because of things like this, and also what's happened today, if that does appear to be the case, we should make sure to start sending Ukraine everything. Bar the red tape, completely remove it, send in the aircraft, send in F-16s, A-10s, the support package to make sure that the A-10s can function, send in everything, send in tanks, send in anything we can think of. Because one thing is for certain, if the Russians are going to start trying to threaten us subliminally by having a stray, a quote-unquote stray missile fly into Poland and kill a couple of farmers, I think we should send the message that the Russians and their red lines don't mean anything to the West, and we'll give them a small taste of what would be to come if they actually did go to war with NATO, and we'll show them the kind of weaponry that a Russian will find themselves being plastered into a paste with. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to the next clip from Kyiv, and we can see here that another missile flying into Kyiv hit some sort of key infrastructure. I'm assuming that it was most likely some kind of an oil silo or an electrical grid that was hit, considering that those are the 2 primary targets that it appears that the Russians are trying to attack at this point. We can see the explosion in the distance, and we can also see a ball of glowing blue light. And that right there leads me to believe that either that's just an odd transformer that's apparently been damaged, or it's part of a relay station. I'm not entirely sure. We can see another missile flying in, going for the exact same target, and heading in the exact same spot. When you see the smoke once again rising into the air. And one thing I do have to note now, because I'm kind of having a little bit of mixed feelings about this. One, we saw the blue glow, so I'm assuming that it may be some kind of an electrical grid. However, there's now a large, thick, black plume of smoke coming from where those missiles hit. And one thing that we've seen throughout this war and have a lot of experience with is oil fires. And so this does look like it may also be an oil silo that's hit. We're not entirely sure which it is, but one thing that we have seen the Russians doing over these past couple of days, and well, past months, the entire war, on these missile attacks, is that whenever they do reach a critical target, it's always some kind of infrastructure regarding electricity or transportation. Usually transportation amounting to some kind of an oil silo. But those are the 2 primary things that they go for. Everything else is secondary, except for residential buildings. Those come first. But then when they actually get to the infrastructure, this is what they go for. And we can see that it's having a little bit of an effect. We have heard reports that Kyiv is suffering a lot of power outages, also lack of water, among other things, really a lack of basic utilities and services, which is incredibly perilous, especially considering that the winter is coming around. But at the same time, we do know that the Ukrainians are getting a large amount of material and monetary aid, not just for their military, but also for their domestic affairs as well. And so hopefully through those funds, they will be able to at least keep some of this stuff running at limited intervals. We know that rolling blackouts will most likely be a common occurrence going on into winter in Kyiv, if there are any people left, because we hear that most of them are being evacuated. But hopefully the Ukrainians can hold the line infrastructure-wise against the Russian attacks, because some of these do look quite severe, like this one here. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Kyiv. And from really most of the Syria... Well, actually, real quick, before we move out of Kyiv and on into our location unknowns, we're going to take a quick little jaunt down to Cherkasy, where we can see that the Ukrainians shot down another missile on film. So today, out of all of the videos we've seen 2 calibers hit their target, and we've seen 2 calibers get shot down. Here's a video of one of these surface-to-air missiles from the Ukrainian batteries shooting down another Russian cruise missile in the night about 24 hours ago. We can see the S-300 firing, and unlike the Russian one, it doesn't miss. It's on its way across the horizon. And we see it hit the Russian missile right there. Oh my lord. I don't know about you, man, but that kind of looks
that
like
man
the
was
Death Star.
hyped.
Yeah, he was like, woo! And also, I don't know about you, man, maybe this is just me, but this looks like the explosion of the Death Star right here. Take a look at that.
Dang. Yeah, I would say Star Wars in real life.
Man, it's just like a movie. But with that, that's the end of the video, and you can hear that the Ukrainians are pretty happy, and I'm also pretty happy, too, to see that a decent amount of missiles are being intercepted on film. Of course, a few of them did make it to their target, and hopefully the number was correct, that around 70 to 77 of these cruise missiles and ballistic missiles were shot down before they ever reached their target. That means that, hopefully, a lot of the damage that was caused was heavily mitigated due to the amount of missiles that were shot down, and the Ukrainians can keep on trucking forward like they have been. And while all of this has been going on behind the lines and the missile attack was incredibly large and may even draw the West into the war a little bit closer than normal, the location unknowns show a story on the front lines that appears to be as good or even better than the ones we've seen before. And so real quick, we're going to take a look at this Russian BMP biting the dust. And it bites the dust quite well. We got to mute that because of copyrighted music. But we can see right there, the little Russian BMP. We can also... What's that? I wonder what that could be. You know, it could be all kinds of things. It could be, I don't know, Russian hopes and dreams going up in flames. Could be, it could be Putin's soul leaving his body after that missile landed in Poland. It could also be a Stugna. I honestly like that one too. I think it's Putin's soul leaving his body, and as it's leaving his body, we can see it exiting out the other side of this BMP and destroying it. And so with that, that's the end of that clip, and I gotta say, Putin's soul is really moving at a high speed. It looks quite explosive. So if you're ever around it, make sure to wear safety glasses. But with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next clip of Location Unknown News, where we see Ukrainian S-300 firing at a missile. We're assuming it's a missile, but it could also be anything. It could be an aircraft, it could be a drone. We're not exactly sure, but this is the biggest S-300 battery we've ever seen from the Ukrainians this entire war. 3 S-300s in the same spot. But with that, here's the video. We can see one S-300 fire and the second one fire. And both of them are on their way. Looks like they're going for the same target. And if so, looks like the Ukrainians are starting to get into the idea of a double tap. And if not, it looks like they're trying to get 2 targets at once. Sadly, we didn't get to see these missiles intercept their targets if they were successful. But still, I gotta say, there is something incredibly cool. Also, wait a minute. Hang on. There's not just 3 S-300s here. There's an S-300 over there. That actually came from a 4th S-300 that was almost off screen. But still, one thing I gotta say is regardless whether we saw these things intercept in a missile or an aircraft or a drone, it is amazing to see 4 S-300s practically set up like an artillery battery, engaging air targets regardless of what they are. It's a really awesome sight. Also, one thing that's really cool to me, and while these are Russian weapons, is how these surface-to-air missiles deploy, because you can see them pop out of their silo, like this one closest to the camera, and they immediately, once the solid rocket motor ignites, they immediately orient themselves to the direction they really need to be going in. And it's just incredible to see this modern technology playing out like this in front of your eyes. And it also shows you, even though the Russians are incredibly unadvanced in these S-300s, and of course, while I'm saying Russian, these are Russian designed and mostly Russian made, or Soviet made, I guess you could say, and the Ukrainians use them a good deal. So these are Ukrainian SAMs. But one thing that's still incredible to think is the amount of technological progress that you can see in these things. And that also begs the question, Matthew, if these things look impressive, what does a Patriot missile defense system look like?
Exactly. Probably very impressive.
Probably really impressive. Also, I heard that some of the versions of the Patriot used in the Gulf War, I believe they were the Block 3 versions, if I'm correct. Those things apparently had something like a 93% success rate, which is unbelievable. That means that 93 out of every 100 targets that it was, I guess you could say, tasked with shooting down, it was able to shoot down. Only 7 of them made it through out of 100. And wow, that's an impressive figure. I think our latest model, according to the tests, is able to have an accuracy or a success rate of around 98%. And that's just truly unbelievable. That means that nothing is going to be getting past a Patriot. Now, I don't know the success rate on an S-300, but let's pull that up real quick and let's see. S-300 missile system. And let's see if there's any public figures on its success rate and its interception rate. So let's see here. So let's scroll down. I mean, you see all the modifications here, all of the different variants. But we're wanting to see the success rate of the most advanced S-300. See, introduced in 1999. But we want to see its success rate. Let's see here. We're just going to type in interception rate. Interception rate. Let's see what we got. Let's see. Dang, it's really hard to find this information. Ukraine's long range, dang, you can't really find any information. Also, Matthew, I like this one. This is actually pretty funny. This article comes from April 8th from Forbes in 2022, this year, saying several S-300s are being lost by Ukraine a week. But what's really funny about that statement is that we can see 4 of them right here just 21 hours ago in operation. And also, if we look at the Ukrainian, let's see, Ukrainian Army inventory. Let's just pull that up. Let's try and get some numbers on these S-300s. How many did they have starting off the war? Let's see here. We want to go to... There's a lot of crap here. Jeez. Field artillery, missile systems, air defense systems. That's what we want. So, let's see. We're just going to scroll down. S-300, S-300. S-300. Here we go. They have 250 S-300s. And I have to assume that a lot of them apparently weren't destroyed, considering that they're putting 4 of them to a battery in a single spot in Ukraine. But still, a very interesting and very cool thing to see. And also we can see that Wikipedia has been working overtime, making sure that they account for all of the surface-to-air missile defense systems that the Ukrainians have gotten. They've already included the Stormers, the Avengers? What? They got these? When do
they have that?
They don't even have these on video or picture yet for us to prove they have. In case if y'all don't know, this thing is a Humvee and it looks pretty advanced, but what's inside of these little silos, I guess you could say, on the side of this turret are AIM-92 Stingers. So it looks really cool, but it's really just a Stinger carrier. It carries 8 of them at a time, but still, I have never seen the Ukrainians get these things, but apparently Wikipedia says they exist. I don't know if that's true or not, though. We'd have to get picture and video evidence to confirm that. Also, when in the world did they get Crotal? When in the world did they get these? Wikipedia.
That is funky looking. Is that like autonomous or something?
I have no idea. One thing I do know is that the French, I believe, use this similarly to an ITO 90, which uses almost the exact same configuration for, I guess you could say, the turret. But I have no idea or any information about this air defense system, and I've never seen any pictures confirming that these things are in Ukraine. But apparently it says, according to Wikipedia, that it was disclosed by France that these crotons would be provided to Ukraine in October. Well, they made that statement in October. We don't know if they're there yet. We can also see that apparently some Hawks, according to Wikipedia, have made it in Ukraine. Once again, take this with a grain of salt because we've never had picture or video evidence to confirm any of this stuff. And we can also see the NASAMS. That is one thing we have been able to confirm. The NASAMS are in Ukraine. But still, man, the Wikipedia page is going wild. I don't even know where they're getting some of this stuff. But still, if they do have it, that's insane. Anyways, moving on from our little endeavor into the S-300 and whether it really works or not, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we saw some Ukrainian snipers at work. And we've started to see a lot of video and picture evidence of these guys at work day by day, but let's take a look at what they're doing now. When you see through the crosshairs, a little bit of a glint in the distance, which appears to be a Russian soldier moving on around. We can now see the Ukrainian in the thermal scope, taking a real good look at the Russian. He snapped the camera, and it looks like the Russian went down for the photo. Say cheese. And he's down. Looks like he's napping. We now see them highlight the Russian in a red circle, which was actually very beneficial in this video. I honestly did not see him until that point. I was like, where in the world is this guy? We can now see the sniper looking through his crosshairs, and we can see something explode over there. I don't even know what happened there. But we can see a Russian moving around.
What the hell was that? It just came flying in.
I have no idea. It looked like a suicidal seagull. So that thing exploded, burned off. What the hell was... Let's see if it comes in again. Oh, it was a chunk! It was a chunk from the explosion. It went flying across the field.
Dang.
Dang! That thing ripped through the field like a tornado. A few moments later, and we can see that it appears that there's a small smoldering fire over there. Still, we can now see a Russian moving along. We can also see them put a stamp on the guy. And now he's standing there, and now it looks like he went for a nap. You know, it was a terrible mistake of this guy to sit still for 2 seconds. You know, if he was walking, I promise, I'm fairly certain, no one would have shot at him. But then he stopped right there. And that was his mistake. And then he just went on down for a nap. We now see the drone looking around the tree line 5 hours later. And we can now see the infrared camera has changed. I'm sure someone is about to say that it's not an infrared, it's some kind of thermal or something. But we can see him looking through a scope. We see him firing. And the Russian has gone down to sleep again. Now, I gotta say one thing about the Ukrainian snipers. I think they ought to start selling them in American stores next to the NyQuil, because one thing they can do is hand out naps like no other. I have not seen anything that compares, rather than the drones, to Ukrainian snipers and their ability to just rack up a decent amount of, I guess you could say, knockdowns, if we want to call them that. The snipers have been working overtime lately. We didn't see them in the beginning of the war. I'm guessing because Ukraine didn't have a massive amount of marksmen or a very competent marksman school at that point, or they weren't using the snipers yet because the front line hadn't solidified well enough for them to be used, one reason or the other. But now we're seeing that they're actually employing marksmen and snipers on the front line, and they're doing a great job. I mean, like, every video we see, and now they appear to be fresh. It doesn't appear to be a compilation of videos over time. It appears to be stuff that's occurring over the past several days. They are knocking down a lot of Russian soldiers. And one thing that we can assume out of all of this is that this is having a massive effect on Russian morale. Because imagine this, okay? You've went through the drone phase, which is still going on, and Russians are getting obliterated left and right by bomblets that you don't even know where they're coming from. You can't even hear or see the drone above you. And now, not only do they have to contend with the fear of a drone dropping a bomb on them, now they have to contend with the fear that if they stand still for 2 seconds, a sniper is going to bust a cap on them, and they're going to go to sleep. So the Russians have got a lot on their minds, and I think one of the last thing on their minds at this point is winning the war. So with that, we're now going to be moving on from this little clip of Location Unknown News, and we're now going to be moving on to something incredibly interesting. The Iranians have admitted at this point to giving the Russians the Shahed 136s. However, they made the stipulation that none of those drones were provided during the war. They were provided before the war. Although that doesn't make any sense because they were provided before the war. Why weren't the Russians using them at the beginning of the war or all the way up until about 4 months ago? Why in the world was it just that they started using it about the halfway point of this war? If they had them the whole time, that would make a lot of sense. What doesn't make a lot of sense, however, to the whole Iranian story, even more so, is that we're now starting to see Iranian-made bulletproof vests and helmets being captured on the front lines of Ukraine, like this one right here, which is marked extra large for an extra large fella. Mr. Lunchtime must be wearing these things. But if we zoom in here, we can see that this appears to be either Arabic or Farsi. I don't really know exactly what Farsi looks like, so let's take a look at Farsi text. And that actually is Farsi, if I'm correct. But let me make
all
sure.
looks the same to me, so I couldn't tell you.
I mean, there is a little bit of a distinct difference. If I pulled up Arabic versus Farsi, you would see it. It's kind of hard to tell though, but I mean that does look a lot like Farsi. I mean that looks exactly like it, as a matter of fact. And so I would have to say, if anything, that is certainly a freaking Iranian bulletproof vest. For a second there, I was looking at it, and the reason why I had to pull up what Farsi looked like is I was thinking, what if that is another country's vest, like a Saudi Arabian vest, or maybe a vest from Syria, because it is Arabic text, and we don't really know exactly where it came from, but we can tell that it's Farsi. It's not Arabic. And so it is certainly coming from Iran. Also, another interesting thing, and this just looks stupid when you really think about it, Matthew. All of this plate carrier and the helmet is in desert camouflage colors. What poor Russian schmuck was walking around in the middle of the Ukrainian woodland dressed in desert camo?
Yeah, seriously, it's like the worst color you could possibly have over there.
You see, Ivan, they're going to be looking in the woods. They're not going to be looking in the desert yet. And so this poor idiot, was having to walk around. And also, here's one great thing, though. He tried, at least. He put on a little Ratnik camo pack on the plate carrier, so at least it was a little bit of woodland camouflage. But all of it was desert tan. And this little schmuck goofball was walking around in all this crap, probably for days on end before he was either captured or killed, until the Ukrainians got a hold of this thing and were like, what the hell? It's Iranian. And on top of that, it looks stupid. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little clip. Once again, interesting to see, and it also shows that the Russians and the Iranians appear to be having a little bit of a special friendship going on with the amount of supplies that the Iranians are sending. And I would have to ask, what more can we do to Iran? Because we've already done a lot to them. That's one thing for sure. The United States is actually pretty strict on Iran already. But what else could we do to them that we haven't done yet that may inflict a little bit more punishment on them for supporting Russia? That's one thing that I honestly cannot answer right now. I know, as far as I know, over the past few decades, we've already pulled out almost all the stops on Iran, and there's really nothing else we can do to them. One thing, however, that I think we could try and do to them is revoke the nuclear agreement we have with them, where they can use enriched nuclear materials to create nuclear power plants. We could do that and then say, well, we're going to have inspectors come in, and then if they refuse, the inspectors go, well, I guess the U.S. military is coming in to make sure that that the yellow cake uranium isn't being used for weaponry. For your safety, of course. But, that's still a little bit of an escalatory step that could involve a whole bunch of extra things that we really can't account for on stream. Well, there's a million things that we can't account for with Iran, because we don't know if the Russians were trying to get involved or the Chinese would get involved, considering that that's almost in their own sphere. We wouldn't really know, but still, it is an interesting point. But with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little information, a little bit of an interesting tidbit. And we're now going to be moving on to the last bit, probably the most important bit, the Russian casualty report for the day. Over the past 48 hours, we've seen that the Russians have lost about an additional 2,000 men. The number went from around 80,000 to now they're already at 82,000 in just 48 hours. We've seen that they've lost another 25 armored personnel carriers, they've lost another 35 supply trucks, another 13 tanks, another 11 artillery pieces, 2 drones, no new MLRSs, no new planes, helicopters, no new cruise missiles. That number will most likely be updated tomorrow, however. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, we didn't see those on picture or video evidence, and no new special equipment or boats. But one thing that we can see is that the land forces are certainly taking a massive beating still. Losing 2,000 people in 48 hours obviously means, doing simple math, that almost 1,000 soldiers were killed yesterday on top of the 700 today. Still not exactly 2,000, but it's getting incredibly close. Going off of those numbers, we can get a fairly good idea that in the next 15 days before December even comes around and Mariah's All I Want for Christmas starts playing everywhere, although it already is, they'll be up to around 100,000 dead. Now, one thing I do have to say is that it's a little bit unfortunate to think that 100,000 poor Russians were being killed in this war, although from what we can tell, a decent amount of them still support the war. But one thing I do have to say is that I don't envy them at all, because if Mariah's All I Want for Christmas Is You is playing non-stop in the grocery stores like it is in America over there in Russia, at least they're getting out of a little bit of something, and their family will get a white lotto out of the whole thing to ease their suffering a little bit while they listen to that song. The other thing, however, that we are seeing is that the amount of armored personnel carriers and tanks being lost is still enough to mean that an entire battalion tactical group's worth of force is being knocked out of the Russian manpower pool per day, equipment-wise alone. Those tanks and armored personnel carriers are either having to be replaced with aging equipment, like the T-62Ms, or even more MTLBs, which they have an unbelievable amount of still in reserve, or they're being replaced with nothing. We don't know which it is, and it's very hard to get this kind of information out of Russia because they have so much crap. If I could show you all how much crap they actually had in picture and video evidence, I would. It's very hard to get pictures of it because most of it's in far Siberia, but they could get some of it running. They could probably get it almost, I would assume, at least squeeze out another 2,000 to 3,000 armored personnel carriers out of what they have in the Far East. They're probably cannibalizing everything else to get them running, hardly at that. And they could probably do that with the tanks as well. The quality of the equipment, though, would be pointless. The armor is obsolete, the tanks are obsolete, all of the equipment within them is also obsolete, and so they would be like sitting ducks and just get blown to pieces by the time they arrived at the front lines. It would still give the Russians the ability, however, to pad their BTGs with enough equipment to say that they are operational, and I guess you could say up to snuff, but once they actually hit the lines, they wouldn't be. And these casualties are showing that that will certainly become the case soon, and that may also be why they're already taking these kinds of casualties daily, both in tank, armored personnel carrier, and troop numbers, because these soldiers are already using this outdated equipment that isn't helping them survive at all, and paired with their poor training and massive amounts of corruption in the Russian army, that also isn't helping them out a lot either. And so that may be why we're seeing that the Russians have now entered the late war, and they're suffering unbelievable amounts of casualties a day with no end in sight. So with that, we've now reached the end of the location unknowns. And we're now going to be moving out of the location unknowns and on into the northeastern area, which has actually been quite active lately, a lot more active than what we've normally seen. And it may suggest that there may be a pickup of activity in this area showing that the Ukrainians are either doing something with the Russians, but we don't really have a clear picture of that yet. However, I am going to start us off in the northeastern area with a very interesting video of some Ukrainian tanks pushing the Russians almost right on the border. But before we get to that, I've seen that Matthew has thrown up a really good poll. And in fact, this has got to be the highest voted poll I have ever seen. 3,000 of y'all have voted on it. That is almost 40% of our live stream viewers that are watching right now that have voted on that poll. The highest voted poll we've ever seen, and also on one of the most tense topics that we've ever covered in the war pertaining to us directly. And so with that, Matthew, take us through that poll and tell us what everyone's thinking right now.
All right, so we do have 3 polls for our first question segment, and the first poll here says, if Russia is the culprit, would it make NATO look weak to not respond with force against Russia? It looks like 58% said yes, it would weaken the alliance, 12% said I'm not sure, and 30% said no, it isn't weak to avoid World War III. Now, on this one, hopefully y'all thought long and hard before you chose an answer because it's a pretty tricky one. I think it's a combination of both yes and no. It would weaken the alliance without a doubt if we were not to respond with force, because anything can be deemed an accident if somebody decides to call it an accident. So where do we draw the line? But at the same time, if we were to respond with force, it's going to likely end up in a world war, which would be absolutely devastating, and there's no telling how that would go. Would nukes be involved? Would it just be conventional forces? We don't know. But Enforcer, what say you?
Before I answer, also, also just addressing the polls made hundreds more vote on it. Have you seen that, Matt? He's gone all the way up to like 3,200.
Yes, it's gone to like 3,200. Yeah.
But anyways, I'm going to share with y'all a short story that I think plays a lot into how NATO will most likely make its own decision making right now, and we can actually see a little bit of precedent for this happen in the 80s. In case y'all didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of y'all do know this, this seems to be common knowledge. Germany was split in two during the Cold War. Of course, at the end of World War II, nobody really was a big fan of the Germans having a country I guess you could say, solidified anymore. And so it was split into a whole bunch of parts, mostly in between the United States, Britain, and France, and then the rest of it went to the Soviet Union. Later on, of course, just a few years later, that would further on solidify into East and West Germany, and it stayed like that until 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunited again. However, I believe it was in 1983, in East Germany, a MiG-23 took off from an airfield, and there was a critical failure on it, at least as far as the pilot could tell. The pilot went, oh crap, the plane's about to crash, and he ejected out of the plane. Well, it turns out that in all of the beauty and glory of Soviet equipment, the alarm that went off in the cockpit was entirely wrong. I actually believe it was some kind of a fuel and pressure gauge showing that all of the pressure had left the plane just in the past few seconds, so it was bound to crash, the engine would stall. He shot out of the plane through the ejection seat, and the MiG-23 actually didn't have any of these problems. It was still at full throttle, not afterburner, however, it was just at full throttle, and it just kept on flying. The thing had been put on autopilot as well, and so it was destined to fly at a specific altitude at a specific speed until it ran out of fuel, and before long, it actually started flying over West Germany. NATO scrambled aircraft immediately, and also the Soviets were largely quiet at first about what was happening. The West thought that it was a Soviet aircraft making an incursion onto NATO airspace, and so we were ready to shoot the thing down. However, we found out one very important thing. The plane was missing its canopy. When a NATO aircraft finally got up to the Russian jet, well, the Soviet jet, we saw that it had no canopy and there was no pilot inside of it, and so the thing was flying completely on autopilot. So we decided that we could either shoot the thing down and we could have fragments of the thing fall all over West Germany and kill who knows how many people, or we could wait for the thing to run out of gas and crash land somewhere, hopefully in the sea, and then hopefully avoid civilian casualties altogether. We decided to let the thing fly until it ran out of gas, and that would turn out to be a mistake, as when it ran out of gas, it actually ended up crashing into Belgium, and just by the complete misfortune of it, ran into a house and killed, I believe, a teenager and about 3 other people. That right there, in a way, could have invoked Article 4 and Article 5 right then and there. But the West and the Soviet Union went to work trying to figure out what they would do, and both sides decided to sweep the entire thing under the rug. They decided to just completely ignore that it happened and just go, oh, that was unfortunate. And that's all that happened. It's largely a forgotten event in history, and it really is. I'm sure that many people don't even know about it, and the only way I know about it is because I watched Mark Felton, and Mark Felton had a video on it, and he covers very obscure but very interesting historical things. So I watched it. I was like, oh my god, I didn't even know that happened. Anyways, going off with the precedent that was laid out in 1983 during that specific instance, I would have to say that while this is a little bit different and this was a missile, the same kind of logic could most likely be applied to this as well. One thing that's for certain is that based off of the American response and the Russian response, it appears that both of them are going to be trying to sweep this under the rug. And this is one thing that we didn't say earlier. And this is something that I'm believing and seeing right now based off of the talk. The Russians completely denied the missiles being theirs at all. They're actually saying that this is some kind of Western provocation. They had nothing to do with it, and they would have done anything like that. Now, that's a straight-out lie. That's one thing that we know for sure. The Russians, of course, fired the missiles. They did fly into Poland, and they did land on the farm and kill the 2 people. However, the statement is showing that they want to have absolutely no attachment to what happened, and they're scared of any repercussions if they came forward and admitted to it. The United States, on the other hand, is saying right now, we don't know if they're Russian missiles. We're going to have to launch an investigation into it and closely collaborate with the Poles to see what really happened. And that's showing that while the Polish, and I've been checking up on the Polish people the best I can and seeing what they're saying on the internet, a lot of the Polish are thirsty for blood, and they're pretty pissed off with the Russians. So we know that Poland's raring to go, and they've been doing that for about 9 months. However, the United States is kind of like the Russians at this point. This is usually historically how it goes. Both sides are looking down the road, and they're saying what I've been saying on stream. The entire northern hemisphere will end up becoming a glass sheet if both of them go to war, just within a matter of hours, days, or weeks. And so none of them really want to go to war, and they know that the repercussions of actually saying that those are Russian missiles, we got to do something about it, will be severe. And so they're most likely going to end up avoiding the situation entirely and saying it was just an unfortunate accident. That's most likely the direction it will go in. The Russians will make some kind of a half-felt, a very aloof apology. Oh, sorry, it was our missile, probably days later. And then the United States will go, well, you know, we're going to make sure to keep a vigilant watch on you people. We'll send probably a stern letter or something similar, and that'll be the end of the entire affair, at least based off of what we did in 1983. Times are different, however. In 1983, there wasn't a land war going on anywhere in Europe. It was just a Cold War, which isn't even a war. And so the situation is a little bit different, but based off of the precedent laid out by the 1983 MiG-23 incident, we can get a good idea that nothing much will come out of this. Although I could be entirely wrong, and it just depends on who's in charge and who's making the calls at the end of the day, and I don't know all of them well enough to know what will come out of that. But in my opinion, I think that it would be a good show, a good sign to make sure to further support Ukraine and start lifting all of the red tape on all of the equipment we haven't sent so far to show that things like that will not go unreciprocated, and we'll make sure to crush the Russian army in the field through the Ukrainian armed forces even quicker and even better through that kind of equipment. And so with that, I hope that answers the poll fairly well. I know that had to have been the longest answer to a poll I've ever given, but it's a very serious issue.
It might have been.
And so with that, I hope we addressed that poll, and we are on to the next one before I keep on going down a rabbit hole.
All right, so the next one said, based on available evidence, do you believe Russia fired the missiles into Poland? It looks like 64% said yes, Russia fired the missiles, and 36% said no, we cannot verify that yet. Okay, so on this one, here's my thought process. Who are the possible culprits? It could have been Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. Are there any other alternatives?
No, those would be the only three. Those are the only three possibilities.
So first off, why would Ukraine launch a missile into Poland that has been helping them the entire time? Why would Belarus go and launch a missile into Poland? I'm not really sure why they'd want to do that, considering they won't even invade Ukraine yet. So to me, logical deduction would be it is Russia. I don't know who else it would be. But Enforcer, what say you?
And here, before I answer that, actually, Matthew, I just saw someone say something very important on the last poll. Jose Ruano, who is a longtime channel viewer, he said World War I started because one guy died. And you're absolutely right. That Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the entire reason World War I started. However, one has to remember this. Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austrian throne. And so his death was almost like killing the up-and-coming, I guess you could say, man, I forgot the name of it, Matthew. The presidential, what is it when they're almost coming into office? When they've been elected and they're just waiting for the inauguration?
Elect?
Yeah, the president-elect. That was practically like killing the president-elect at that point. Killing 2 farmers in Poland, while I'd say that should invoke a strong response, because I view a citizen as a citizen regardless of what position they hold. All of them are equally valuable. Still, the Polish government in the U.S. is going to look at it as, okay, it was just 2 farmers. At least it wasn't anyone important in the central government of either Poland or any other NATO country, and so maybe we can just let the whole thing slide. But still, that's a pretty good point. Anyways, moving on to this one. We don't have enough information yet to confirm it was the Russians. Because one thing that I will hold out is that it could have been the Belarusians. We are not entirely sure. The Belarusians could kind of be getting involved in this war, and it's very hard to throw any blame at them of being directly involved in this war if a missile is launched from their territory, because it's really hard to confirm who that missile battery belongs to because we can't visibly see them most of the time. And we don't know really who's firing. We do have satellites, but that's still hard to pick up on satellite satellite imagery. So it could have been the Belarusians. I would rule out the Ukrainians almost entirely. There's a small percentage there, but the chance of an S-300... And I got to think, we got to think about this, man, because this is something very important to dispel the idea it could have been a Ukrainian S-300. If a missile was flying to Lviv, we could assume that it could come from Belarus, but it would most likely not come from Brest. It would be somewhere near Pinsk, or somewhere in between Brest and Pinsk. It would be coming down almost directly along Ukraine. And so if an S-300 was launched and missed, not only would it not be flying into Poland, it would be flying over Ukrainian territory. I believe the S-300s explode after a certain time in air if they fail to hit their target. And so,
Interesting.
I can't confirm that, though. If anyone does have a little bit more familiarity with the S-300, please let us know that in the live chat. But it would make no sense for an S-300 fired to intercept a Russian missile, either coming from the northeast, the direct east, or the southeast from the sea, to travel west or northwest into Poland and then land 4 miles behind. That wouldn't make any sense. It would make a lot more sense for a Russian missile coming towards that direction from the west to then overshoot and fly into Poland. That's one thing that I would say with certainty would make a lot more sense than the story that I've started to see get flung around that it may be a Ukrainian missile. Although we can't be really sure. I would still say, by and large, I would say without a doubt it's most likely a Russian missile. And so with that, I hope we addressed that poll fairly well. And now we're on to the last poll.
All right, so we actually have 2 more to go. This next one said, if Poland invokes Article 4 of NATO, is this an appropriate response to the missile hits? 84% said yes, investigate first and then act. 6% said I'm not sure, and 10% said no, NATO should respond harshly. Now, I think it's always wise to investigate first, especially when the consequences could be so dire as World War III. We always want to make sure we have all the details first. That's just my opinion. But, I mean, I could see an argument where some of you might want to go ahead and just jump right into the fire. But, I mean, are y'all really ready for World War III? Because it could be quite devastating. So, Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say this is something that you got to think about. And at this point, and I got to say this, regardless of who the U.S. president is, you've got to give a load of credit to any president who ever has to face this situation. Right now, the president of the United States, leader of the Western sphere, and, you know, we're not going to talk about him on a political level. We're going to talk about him on the leader of levelship he's at right now. Right now, he has the balance of around 600 million people, or more. It's really closer to around 700 or 800 million in his hands. Based on the decisions that the United States will be making pretty much on behalf of the Poles and the entire NATO alliance, he could be putting these 600 to 800 million people in jeopardy of certain death through nuclear onslaught. And that's why we're seeing right now that the United States and also the Poles are taking an extreme amount of caution in saying that it was a Russian missile. If they say something like that, it will be expected by both of these governments that they will follow through on that claim by invoking Article 4 and then Article 5, respectively. That is why...
Now, Enforcer, real quick, I just want to point out, since you're on that topic of how people are responding to it, I was kind of intrigued today when I heard Zelensky's response to what happened in Poland. It was kind of a little bit shocking to me, considering the circumstances. Did you hear that response?
Not yet. I'm actually saving that for later on stream, because in case y'all didn't know, I got up at 5 o'clock this morning and literally been going nonstop until I got home and didn't even really have time to watch the address beforehand. So I'm actually saving that for later on. So I think we would probably want to address that at the end of the stream when we do get to the address, so that way everyone here who may have not watched it can watch it, and then we can talk about it once everyone's seen what he said. Also including me, because I would be talking blindly right now because I haven't actually seen it.
Okay.
All right. So with that in mind, can you reread that poll again, so that way I can make sure we keep on that.
If Poland invokes Article 4 of NATO, is this an appropriate response to the missile hits?
I would say it would be an appropriate response, but one thing we do have to remember is that an invocation of Article 4 pretty much means we're on the road to Article 5. And that's a very scary premise. And when you think about it from the leadership perspective of the President of the United States, with around 600, 800 million lives in his hands, and while there are loads of Western leaders like the Prime Minister and President of Poland, the Prime Minister of the UK, the Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, that are also incredibly powerful and important, the final call of what NATO and the entirety of the West will do comes down to the United States. And so we have to decide at the end of the day, are we willing to put 600 to 800 million lives on the line and possibly get them killed over this one singular event? And that's why we will most likely see that we may not invoke Article 4. We may try and sweep the thing under the rug. However, if it was something severe like a missile landing in the middle of Warsaw and hitting near a government building, that's an entirely different story. But it did hit in the farmland. And also, one thing that y'all may not remember, I don't know, this was a long time ago, in a short answer in the question segment weeks ago, is that we actually talked about this, and I said, we actually talked about a missile straying into Poland and hitting, and I said these two scenarios, and I think, Matthew, you might remember it, but we've done so many streams and so many hours of it, it may be very hard to remember, but I said, if it falls somewhere in an unpopulated area in a farm field, it's probably going to cause nothing. If it kills a couple of people out there, that may be cause for concern, probably will still cause nothing. If it hits in a populated area, though, we will most likely invoke Article 4 and Article 5. And so, going off of that, I was waiting to see if Matthew would confirm that or not, but going off of that...
No idea.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But going off of that answer, and I hope that a lot of our channel aficionados who've really watched this thing can go back and get a timestamp for that on that stream, although y'all would have to go through like 90 hours of content. I'm sorry about that. But I think that we're most likely going to be going down that direction. But with that, I hope that Article 4 has been invoked. Hang on, someone's just said Article 4 has been invoked.
It has not.
Poland news. Let me just make sure. Let's see. Reuters says Poland likely to invoke Article 4. But that's not invoking Article 4 yet. That's just speculation. So with that, we're now going to be moving on from that poll and on to the next one. We're going to have to make this one a little bit short because we've been in the poll segment for ages. So with that, on to the next one.
All right, so for the fourth and final poll of the first question segment, the question on this one says, do you think this Russian accident was the Russians' way of testing NATO's resolve? It looks like 42% said yes, it was designed to test NATO, 18% said I'm not sure, and 40% said no, it might have been an accident. Now, I put this poll up since the Russians are claiming it was an accident. It might have been a way for them to test to see how well NATO was going to respond to something. And then them turn around and try to claim it was an accident. They know we aren't really ready to get into World War III, so maybe nothing will happen. They took that risk, but we'll have to wait and see. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it was most likely an accident. Testing response times of the West by actually landing ordnance within NATO borders and killing people is practically leading up to war. If that was their attempt at trying to test their responses, they may be testing how long they can live beyond the actual war setting in. So I don't think that's the case. I actually
But how else could they test our resolve though?
Flying bombers near our airspace, or fighter aircraft, or building up forces along the border in small camps. There's a lot of ways that they've always been testing our response times and what we'll be doing, including war games as well. War games is the one that we don't really talk about a lot. Usually, I'm always talking about air incursions and similar things, but war games are also a similar way where we test everyone's response time. We do it, the Russians do it, everyone does it. You see the North Koreans do it yearly. Usually you'll see that make the annual cycle on mainstream news where they're talking about, oh, the North Koreans are going to invade South Korea because they're playing the war game that they've been playing for 50 years annually at the same time. And that's one of the ways they also test our response time. However, it's never been laid out as a precedent of actually firing missiles and weapons into NATO territory from the Russians or the Soviet Union to try and test their response times. That would pretty much be an invocation of war if that was the case. So I feel like it was actually an accident, especially with how the Russians have responded and how they have already made it clear years prior that getting in a direct, open confrontation with the West would be the end of Russia. The army could not handle it. And that's one thing they've made clear. And so getting that close to actually getting in a war, I don't really see. I just don't think that they would do something that stupid, although they are a fairly stupid country with a stupid government.
Here's my question, though. Russia is terrible at targeting. We know that. But I would assume that the commanders take extra care when they're targeting toward the border of Poland. I would assume. If they didn't, that would be absolutely insane. So to me, it seems unlikely that 2 missiles flew into Poland by accident.
Well,
I don't think there's accidents like that happen in war.
Well, funnily enough, Matthew, this is something crazy that I've seen today. It may explain what happened. The coordinates to these missiles, the target that they're going for, has to be input into them like anything. And one thing that's interesting is that someone actually measured out the parallel that Kyiv is on, and then the longitude. I believe it is is it the longitude that goes north to south?
I believe so. Yeah.
So they.
I think maybe not. I don't know.
let me make sure. Let me make sure. Longitude, because I want to get this correct. I don't want to sound like a dope. So longitude is, yeah, the direction north to south, and then latitude would be, I suppose, east to west. Wait, no. Longitude is east to west, so latitude is north to south. Okay, so apparently the latitude of Kyiv was input, and then the longitude of Lviv was input into the same missile. And so ending up at that same longitude and latitude, the missile would have landed in Poland due to a misinput.
Maybe.
That is one of the most plausible explanations I have seen yet today, is that apparently it was a misinput in the missile. They put in the and hopefully I'm getting this correct, I've almost forgotten already, the latitude of Kyiv and then the longitude of Lviv, and both of those intersect right in that same farm area in Poland where the missiles landed. That's probably the best explanation I've heard. And if the Russian missile batteries have slipped up that bad, they must be using, I don't know, Dumb and Dumber to shoot off the missiles? Top-notch idiots must be operating them or something? I have no idea. But if they really pulled off something that dumb, I can't believe it. So with that, we're now going to be moving back to the northeastern area. But before we do, let's answer a couple of questions, and then we'll shoot into the Radio Free Europe video of the Ukrainian tanks pushing the Russians back in the northeast.
All right, so up first, we have a $230 super chat from none other than Mark, Slava Ukraine, the channel legend, who says, "Evening, guys. Actually, an old Ukraine, and you put in parentheses, Soviet cruise missile hit Zagreb on 11th of March. No injuries. And the question is there any confirmation of the Kinburn/left bank of the Dnipro?"
And thank you so much for the support, Mark. And also, welcome back. Saw you on the Sunday night.
Hold on a minute.
Yeah, I know, mine was weak. Sorry. For some reason, my throat's really having a tough time tonight. And also that's why I'm kind of sounding, I guess, a little bit more baritone to me. And I'm trying to fluctuate, but it's not really coming out. Anyways, thank you so much once again for the support, Mark. And you are correct. Back in the day, almost at the very beginning of the war, a Russian cruise missile did fly pretty much all the way into Croatia. It was around Zagreb, and nothing really came of it. It also didn't explode, so that really helped to not make anything of it. But that is a good point. Also, as far as I know, and let me make sure to pull up NATO countries' map, because it's sometimes hard to track who's a member and who's not. Croatia is a member of NATO, I believe. And they are. Wait a minute, hang on. Austria isn't a member of NATO?
Wait, who?
Austria? You would think that they would be a member of NATO. And they're not. That is the bizarrest thing I've ever seen. I thought the whole time they were a member of NATO. They're not.
And they haven't asked to join recently?
No, and that's the weirdest thing. Because Austria has been Western aligned, but apparently not a NATO member, literally since the end of World War II. They've been Western aligned since. They were never a communist bloc country, and I have no idea why they haven't joined NATO. If someone could explain the internal policies of Austria and why that hasn't been the case, I would love to know. That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Anyways, moving on from that. That is true. It did land in NATO territory then. It didn't explode, though, so it made it really easy to...
And also, real quick, Enforcer, I see people saying they're neutral, but wasn't Sweden neutral, though?
Sweden is a neutral country, and Finland largely.
Yeah, and they're trying to join, too.
And also, Switzerland is neutral, yet they've taken financial action against the Russians by seizing their assets within Swiss banks. So that's kind of wild. I mean, what's the weirdest thing about it is if they're pledged to neutrality, then how come they're a member of the European Union? Because the European Union these days went from being an economic apparatus to now they're almost becoming their own military and economic apparatus, and yet they're a part of that. That's kind of odd. But anyways, moving on from that. That is a good point, Mark, and nothing came out of that, and so we might see that nothing comes out of this event as well, although people were killed in this one. And also, any confirmation of the Kim Burn left bank of the Dnipro? Sadly not. We have not heard anything from that area of the Dnipro reservoir or even the finger. I'm going to call this the finger from now on. It looks like a big pointing finger. But I haven't heard any confirmation of anything going on out there. We do know that the Russians have largely abandoned the southern bank of the Dnipro River. Apparently, Ukrainian forces are able to climb up onto the Antonovsky Bridge without even getting a shot fired at them, which tells us that the Russians must have evacuated the entire swamp area, and they're now in Oleski or even further south. And we've also, well, we'll get to that later, but we have seen that by and large, the Russians are not really strongly defending the Dnipro River as much as we thought, but we also haven't seen the Ukrainians push over just yet. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Mark. It helps this channel keep on running. It helps us to keep the lights on, so that way we can keep on reporting the news, such as tonight, which was incredibly severe. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
Right, and up next, we have a $50 super chat from Paul Fitzgerald, also a channel legend, who says, you need to a best of. I was watching the first stream and want to binge watch, but summary of the year would be great.
And thank you so much for the support. And also, Paul Fitzgerald, that is a pretty cool idea. I would think about doing it. I'm trying to get a new video series set up in the background, which should be pretty interesting. It's not really coming together as easily as I hoped it would, so I don't know when it's coming out. But it will be pretty cool to see if I can get it all coming together. That is a cool one, though.
So, also, real quick, my video is coming out next Monday. So, I haven't given up on it. It's coming soon, though. And it's going to be a good one. I think you're going to like it.
And hopefully we will. Hopefully it's a pretty good one. I'm not going to spoil it, but hopefully it will be a good one. But getting back to that answer, I would love to do something like that. I think I'll give it a good shot, a good college try. I mean, I am in college, so I guess the pun's there. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, Paul. Also a really interesting idea, and I think I will try and do a best of. One thing that I've always gotten suggestions to do, and this has been a common one, is to make a compilation of the most interesting moments of each night's stream. However, we run so many streams and there's so little time in a day that it would be very hard for me to download the file. Usually the file for these streams is like 110 gigabytes, which would take almost 4 days to download, to then edit down and compress into a much smaller video, and then re-upload that and upload that as a video highlight section. It would be very hard to do. But I guess for an entire year summary, I probably could do it because it's a one-time thing. But with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the last question, and we're finally going to be getting on to that video from Radio Free Europe of the Ukrainian tanks in action in the Northeast.
All right, and the final super chat of the first segment goes to Praise Adonai, who of course is a channel legend. He puts in a $40 donation and says, Enforcer and Matt, when this war ends, what will be the fate of Putin? Will he be deposed? Will he fall out of a window? Will he be glorified by the gullible media? Or will he be voted out of office? What will the world do? But I can tell you one thing, he won't be voted out of office, though. That'll be one that we can rule out right now.
Breaking news, 110% of Russian population vote for shirtless Vladimir again. I do not think he'll be voted out. That's a certainty, for sure. Never voted out. One thing that can happen, though, I'm thinking that this will most likely become more of a certainty if his power is threatened, is painting the ceiling. If y'all have never heard of painting the ceiling, it's what a lot of politicians, a lot of leaders do when they see that they're backed against the wall and there's nowhere to go. They usually pull out the old crimson colored paint. Usually it turns into something more of a claret color, but usually they
painting houses.
Yeah, well, you know, it would,
painting ceilings.
Well, usually, you know, if you direct the paintbrush a certain way, and also put your head in between the paintbrush and, you know, wherever you're going, usually it just paints the ceiling. But, you know, some...
De Niro impression?
What?
Can you do a De Niro impression? Painting houses?
So I heard you paint houses. That probably wasn't a good one. That was probably bad. But with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. I honestly think that's the most likely option. If not, I could see him absconding with a whole bunch of money and fleeing to a foreign country. I don't know where, though, because no one's really wanting to take him anymore. Not even the other members of the CSTO, and if Russia falls, Belarus will probably be having a small government change as well. I think they would probably... the only place I could see him going is North Korea, but why would he want to go to North Korea? I mean, like,
I don't think you'd go there.
I don't think he would, because if y'all know anything about North Korea, they're dirt poor and they're starving to death, and that's really the place that he probably wouldn't be able to end up, because there's only room for 2 obese people. And, well, there's not enough room for 2 obese people in North Korea. The only one that's allowed is Kim Jong-un. There's no room for a second one. So...
if it ever came to him having to flee the country, he would likely jump out of a window himself before he did that.
I would have to honestly say the only option I see for him now is painting a ceiling or jumping out a window. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that answers the question fairly well. And with that, we are now moving out of the question segment, and we're now moving on into the Northeastern news, where we've seen that the Ukrainians are pushing back the Russians, mostly with their tank force. Of course, credit to Radio Free Europe that provided this video. And so without further ado, let's take a look at it.
Мы сейчас находимся в Харьковской области, недалеко от линии фронта. Здесь сейчас украинские военные идут в наступление. Нам удалось встретить этот экипаж танкистов, которые возвращается из гущи боя для того, чтобы перезарядиться.
This man's got balls. I'm just sitting here. I was sitting here and thinking, like, should I say anything about it? This guy's got balls to be riding on the front of a tank. You know, just sitting on it. Usually they ride on the back on the engine bay. This guy is going for the. He's doing it for the clip.
И они согласились нам рассказать, что сейчас там происходит на передовой, непосредственно на линии столкновения.
Also, I love the camo net. Oh my god, Randy! I don't know if you saw this, but I swore it scared me for a second. I thought this guy was about to drop the shell headlong into the tank. I was like, oh god.
Oh man.
Watch. Well, let's watch this again. Oh man. Yeah, I couldn't do the job of loading the tank because if that guy's hand had just slipped, and if it's not going to go off, but it would have fallen to the bottom of the turret, and that would freak the hell out of me. We can also see them hanging their helmets off of the machine gun.
Останній період був складний десь 2 тижні, то ми стріляли в середньому по 50 снарядів в день, прикривали нашу піхоту, тому що там танки виїжджали і били по наших позиціях. Ми старались цього не допустити.
Їх там занадто багато. Є різні ситуації тоді, коли попередньо було відпрацьовано по ворогу, по місцям їхнього закріплення. І здавалося б, що там вже можна туди зайти після артобстрілу, після підготовки нашої. Вони інколи ловлять цей момент і завозять туди іще людей, дуже велику кількість, не те, щоб я сказав, погано підготовлених, навіть здається зі сторони, що вони не до кінця розуміють, куди вони попадають. Не надо. Я коли на ньому виїжджаю, значить приїжджаю.
We now see the tank firing. And we can also hear this guy apparently let out a small turret after the tank fired. He went, ugh. What was that?
He was very satisfied with that tank.
Ну, вони взагалі не бережуть людей. Там навіть не йде розмова про те, щоб зберегти людей. Там немає об'єктивної цілі так їх використовувати. Вони можуть закинути в голу посадку і там її тримати скільки можуть.
They say recently mobilized Russian troops lack weapons and military experience. I wonder if it's actually fact. I think it's a little bit more than they say. I think it is the Russians that recently mobilized their troops lack weapons and military experience. It ought to be stated more so as a fact than kind of a rumor. We got video evidence to confirm
Sounds
that.
like rumor on the street or something.
Yeah,
It's like We heard through the grapevine that the Russians don't have weapons.
It's like the little shoe shine kid, you know, you give him $20 and he looks left and right and then he says, "They say word is on the street that there's new booze at the speakeasy." It's like, it's not like this is some kind of rumor. This is just straight up fact at this point.
Выскочили тогда на колонну, прямое столкновение. Я сразу развернул машину вправо и увидел, что техника начинает текать. Ну и в тот же момент наводчик открыл огонь без команды командира. И это было хорошо, что они еще начали...
He's like, we saw some Russians retreating. We shot at them and then they put it in high gear and really started hauling it down the road.
Быстрее текать. И мне, честно, мне понравилось, как они текают. Им тут нечего делать.
Now with that, that's the end of the video, but of course, credit to Radio Free Europe that is helping us to get a good idea of what's going on in the northeastern area. And so with that, we're now going to be moving down to the area of Svatove, where we saw that a Russian supply truck was slightly damaged. Stugnas, in short, are like a repairman that you fail to pay, or more so a car mechanic that you fail to pay. If you don't pay them, they usually stick a screwdriver through your oil pan, but instead of doing a screwdriver, the Ukrainians will shove a whole anti-tank missile in the oil pan, and then you lose the whole truck. But we see right here that they fired off the Stugna. It's traveling on its way towards the truck, which is still on the move, and it looks like they just stuck the old massive screwdriver in the oil pan, and that truck is out of action. I don't know about you, Matthew, but I think the Russians ought to start paying their car repairmen, or they're going to start whipping out stickness and start screwing over the trucks. But with that, with that, it's now time to move on to just north of Svatove, where we saw another sniper unloading onto the Russians. We see them looking back at this, and we can see 3 Russians in a group, and this sniper throw out 3 shots in quick succession, a 4th one, a 5th one, a 6th one, a 7th one, an 8th one,
and they all just stand there.
And they just stood there. They literally got knocked down like ducks at a shooting range, just standing
Lemmings.
there. I gotta tell you, I don't know what's up with the Russians. I don't know if it's something in the water or something, but it seems like they just lack common sense sometimes. Like here, it's like once you saw the first guy go down, you'd think it would be reasonable to hit the floor or to start running, you know, because there's really nothing you can do against a sniper, and they just stood there. Honestly, I don't even know where to go with this. With that, it's now time to move on from the northern area of Svatove and from the straight-up stupidity of the Russians, and now it's time to move a little bit more south to the area of Novomilkiske, where we saw some really heavy mud. In fact, the mud's so heavy that this video was filmed by a Ukrainian Humvee driver, and their Humvee has gotten stuck in the mud. And we can now see what the Rasputitsa is. And I know that a lot of people complain about me saying that a million times over, but I don't care. That's what it is. Here's Rasputitsa. Also, let me hear some rap music. We see this Ukrainian doing a quick zoom, and now we can see how bad it really is. They're pretty much driving through a sea of mud. We can now see them calling up for a tank, hopefully to try and recover him. But I gotta be honest with you, that mud is so thick, it's going to be very hard for the tank to even get them out without it getting stuck too. This is the kind of mud that killed Russian advances during the earlier parts of the war in April and May, pretty much. This is when that happened, and we saw loads of Russian tanks getting abandoned on the field because there was no way to recover them due to the mud. And it looks like the Ukrainians are going to have to start tackling this as well. Hopefully they'll do a little bit of a better job than the Russians, but I gotta tell you, I don't think we have anything similar to this at any time of year in Alabama. This kind of mud. Like, wow. This stuff is like 2 feet deep. Like, it's deep enough that if you threw a dog into that, it would just sink into it.
Huh.
Kind of a weird scale of measurement, but still, I mean, I feel sorry for Patron. Patron is just on holiday now. He can't even walk across the road without sinking into it. But with that, Speaking of the Svatove area real quick, we have seen an increased amount of activity in this area from the Ukrainians, specifically from the snipers and also anti-tank units. However, while they are racking up casualties on the Russians, we aren't seeing a lot of forward movement by the Ukrainians covering more ground, and so it appears that it's just a recent pickup of activity and it's not really resulting in any frontline changes. However, as we move further down towards the area of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians are still repelling the Russian assaults that have been going on here for quite some while, starting off in the area of Sperne, where we saw a French Foreign Legion volunteer in combat against the Russians. And so with that, here's the video.
Empty, empty.
We hear the machine gun giving it to him. And we see this French soldier firing off his gun into the thicket. The tree line's almost been destroyed by artillery fires and also straight up fire earlier on. You see most of the foliage is also fallen, well, most of the leaves, not foliage, has fallen off as well, showing us that it is definitely the later part of November, the part we're in right now, and so the footage was taken recently. We now see the soldier reloading. And also, oh Bobby, what's that? That's a Russian army ration. It looks like they may have taken the position.
Interesting. I don't know if you saw that, Enforcer, or not. Maybe you might have missed it.
Oh, what did I miss?
I think I saw something down there. Can't say. I'm not sure if I was seeing things or not.
You were seeing things. I thought I saw it for a second too. It was a piece of a log. And so with that, that's the end of the video, but gotta give a huge credit to the Foreign Legion, to all of them, whether they be from France, Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, the list goes on forever. You can name any country that has denounced the war, there are volunteers from that country. And you gotta give them a huge load of credit, because guys like this French volunteer may have been there since the very start of this war, and he is still there right now, fighting in Ukraine for a country that's not even his, entirely because he just believes in the cause. And they fight incredibly well. A lot of these guys have former combat experience, and we've seen that the Foreign Legion has become an invaluable part of the Ukrainian military, and a bit of weight that they'll throw around whenever they need to make sure to balance off an area of the front line that may need a little bit of support. And so a huge credit to the Foreign Legion, and a huge credit to this French soldier who was filming at this time and showing us what they've been doing in the area of Sperne. With that, we're now going to be moving down into Bakhmut. And while we got no news today on day 266, we did get news from day 255 of what the town at least looked like. And here's a little bit of a picture, one that's not too unfamiliar to any of us at this point, of what the Battle of Bakhmut has turned into and what it really looks like. And so with that, here's the video of the very recent footage just taken today of what Bakhmut has now turned into. And I'm going to have to mute the music, of course, copyrighted. You see the Ukrainians walking through the town, and you can see that most of the buildings have suffered some kind of damage. It hasn't gotten to the levels of Mariupol damage, but all of the buildings have been lightly, moderately, and very few of them have been heavily damaged at this point. We now see the Ukrainian soldiers moving along around this building. And with that, that's the end of the video. But while it's a short clip, it doesn't really show us any kind of frontline fighting. It does give you an idea of what Bakhmut is turning into. And it's turning into every other city we have ever seen on the front lines. Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Sumy, Chernihiv, Kherson. Hell, I mean, like, the list goes on and on. You can't even name them all off. If you look around the map, though, you will be able to remember and know where they are. Even some of the smaller towns like Marinka, which has been a battlefield ever since the beginning of the war, look like that. And the Ukrainian soldiers, still to this day, going through hell after hell, being created each and every time by the Russians over the course of a few weeks, will continue to march into it and hold it and defend it. And you got to give them a load of credit for that, because you know the sights that they see in these towns are horrendous. And yet they still sit there and they'll defend this town until the Russians run out of men, or they run out of bullets, one or the other. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the second video, where we see that a grandmother, a babushka, as they call them, has been getting a little bit of support from the Ukrainian army that's in the area, one of the few people that's left in the town. And we see her getting some food and some goodies from the soldiers. And so with that, here's the video. We have to keep it muted for copyright reasons, but you see that the soldiers are making sure to give her some stuff. And also, they're giving her a glass of the good stuff. A nice jug of it.
Nice.
We see her having a conversation. And also, this man right here, he's throwing out some mixed signals. He's got an American flag on the helmet and a British flag on the arm. And I don't know where he's from. And we can't unmute the video because he's got copyrighted music, so we can't hear his voice. But still, suffice it to say, we can assume that he's either from Britain or America. He's an English-speaking person. And with that, that's the end of the video, but it's nice to see the Ukrainian army, while still defending the city and making sure to fight to defend the people who live within it, like this babushka, which is what Derwalgut said is babushka in Ukrainian. It's very nice to know that they're still taking care of those people behind the lines that are still there. I don't know why this woman hasn't been evacuated or chose to be evacuated, maybe because this is the only place she knows and she doesn't want to leave, but regardless, you got to respect her a pretty good deal for sticking it through and staying where she has, I assume, grown up and lived, and also to the soldiers as well, who make it their personal job to take care of her and help her out. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Bakhmut area, and while we didn't get a lot of video footage, or any video footage at all, of the frontline situation and what that looks like, we do know that the Russians are still mounting a high amount of casualties and fatalities per day trying to take the city, and they have not gained any ground whatsoever. As far as we know, they haven't even really made it into the, I guess you could say, the outer rim of the city. They're still in, I guess you could say, the suburbs and the small amounts of villages and towns surrounding Bakhmut, but they have not actually made it into Bakhmut city. With that, we're now going to be moving down from Bakhmut and on into the area of Marinka, where we saw a very short clip of a Russian airstrike being conducted in the area by two Su-25s. And so with that, here's the video. We can also hear the rock music being played when you see the Su-25s firing off their rockets and also popping off flares at the same time. And now they're turning around and trying to get the hell out of there. We now see a rocket land further on in the distance. And with that, that's the end of the video. But once again, while we got a little bit of footage of the Russians conducting an airstrike, it's not really showing that the situation is turning to Russia's favor. It's also showing that there's still no frontline activity in the Donetsk area. Not at all. We have not seen any movements whatsoever, either from the Ukrainians or the Russians. Not unexpected, but still business as usual. Moving on out of the Donetsk area and down into the southern front, we have one bit of news. Just one from the entire front line, where we see the Ukrainians pulling a hit-and-run Humvee raid. And so with that, here's the video. Not a lot of explanation needed, so here we go. When you see the Humvee moving along, this one's equipped with a Dushka, not a 50 cal machine gun. When you see them passing the tank,
Him flying down the dirt road singing that.
oh, they've modulated the voices so you can't tell who they are. That's why they sound like that. We now see them firing an infantry mortar.
Вылетело, принимай. Вылетело, зустрічай. Мы сворачиваемся.
Красавый, все охуенно.
Дякую. Тримаємося, хлопці. Тримаємося.
We now see them getting on down into a tree line, or a foxhole it seems. Artillery landing around them. Now see the artillery landing right by the car as they're getting in. We actually see the clouds of smoke right in front of them, and with that, that's the end of the video. And one interesting thing I have to throw in here, because of course I am in college and I actually had to read a book for a book assignment, book review. You have to do those often in a history major. And it was a book review on a book called With the Old Breed by, let me see, I believe it was Ernest Sledge. The last name Sledge. You may know it because there was a television series made about the book called The Pacific. I had to read the book from start to finish. It was so interesting. I made sure to read the entire thing and not just try and get the summary of it. And one thing that I've seen as a recounting from both World War I, World War II veterans, and veterans of every kind of every war, ever since World War I, is that artillery is absolutely hair-raising. It frays your nerves on the first shot and leaves you feeling completely helpless. And considering that that's a story that every single veteran of every single war has ever told, it adds a whole extra layer of respect you have to have for these Ukrainian soldiers who we see in loads of videos getting shelled. And not only do they get shelled, and unlike a lot of our, I guess you could say, forefathers and veterans that have served for the United States before in prior wars, they don't have the option most of the time to lay down in a foxhole and just sit there and take it. The Ukrainians have to keep moving. Modern warfare has... Eugene Sledge, thank you so much, Adrian, for clarifying that. It's Eugene Sledge. But the artillery fire that they take is of the same intensity, sometimes even more, than what we've seen soldiers in the past take. Yet these soldiers cannot sit down and hide. They've got to get up and they've got to keep moving. They've got to move to the next position. They've got to hurry the hell up. And so these guys are going through the same nerve-fraying, never-ending artillery barrages, yet you see them running to cars, hopping in them, unloading mortars, loading mortars, and driving straight through it. And when you think about all of that stress that they're going through, pretty much on the very end of their nerves, almost at the breaking point, and they're somehow keeping this professionalism intact and still carrying through their duties and their job, it's unbelievable to really think about the kind of courage that it would take from an average person to do something like that. And I guess they're not really average for that reason. They must be extraordinary. But with that, that's the end of this video, and it's still impressive to see the Ukrainians in action and using their infantry mortars to great effect. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the southern front, which of course is completely inactive as usual, and we're now going to be moving into the Dnieper Reservoir, where we saw the Ukrainians on some boats. And so with that, here's the video. When you see this man up here, I feel sorry for this man, Matty. You know his left side ribs are going to be sore as hell tomorrow. Is just look at that.
Yes. Oh, man. He's taking a beating.
Oh, God bless him. And when you see them racing across... Oh, that's pretty. Wow, that's just serene.
Almost like photoshopped.
It does, doesn't it? I bet you it's ionizing radiation from the power plant.
Yeah, that's a nice thought.
Yeah, it's probably not, but still, that was a beautiful scene, and it's very interesting to see the Ukrainians out on boats on the Dnieper River. It looks like they're having a little boating day, although the weather at this point is certainly not boating weather. It's in the 30s. But with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little clip, and we're now finally going to be moving on down into Kherson. We have very little news to cover in Kherson. Of course, the liberation occurred last week, and there was a lot of news to cover, but now the news is largely dying down. It appears that the front is starting to stabilize like we supposed it would. We don't know if the Ukrainians still have intentions of crossing the Dnieper River, and we haven't seen that happen over the past 48 hours. And so with that, we're now going to be moving to Novokakhovka, where we have a really interesting little sound for y'all to hear. And so, let me go, click on the Twitter, and this video was filmed in Novokakhovka, and let's listen to the sounds that they're hearing in the distance. Do you hear that? That sounds like liberation just a mile away. That actually scared me. That was so loud compared to the gunfire. I was like, oh crap. But we hear some pretty decent fire carrying on in the distance. It sounds like a pretty prolonged firefight. And one thing that tells us is that the Ukrainians are engaging the Russians right on the dam. That's the only place that they could be fighting them at. So right now, at this moment, the Ukrainians and the Russians are fighting for who will control the dam. The Russians aren't blowing it up. That seems to be a certainty at this point. They blew up the road bridge, but they're not blowing up the dam. So now the question is, will the Ukrainians capture the bridge intact? We won't really know for sure until the next few days, so we're not really going to go into that much. But the next clip we can see are some Ukrainians a little bit further behind the lines enjoying some delicious Kherson watermelon. And so let's check them out having a great feast.
Херсонские кавунчики. Чина? Чина. На.
Nah.
Побольше, можно?
Охуел?
У меня ебало побольше.
These things have to have a godly status. These people eat them wherever they can. Like, look, I mean, it's insane. Every time there's a video from Kherson, almost every other video, they're eating a watermelon. We're going to have to get our hands on one of these things, Matthew, because they got to be just the most mouth-watering watermelons on Earth.
Yes, must be.
And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from this little bit of news around the Novikhovka Dam, and now it's time for us to move in the direction of Kherson. Starting off with day 266's news, which is today, where we can see a couple of pictures from Kherson. While we don't get a lot of videos of the liberation and the celebrations resulting from it, we can see some pictures of people still celebrating the liberations right to this day. We see them talking with soldiers. We can see them, of course, laying flowers, most likely for all of the soldiers and civilians that have died so far in the war. We can also see them in front of one of the administrative buildings. See them holding up some more Ukrainian flags in the darkness of the night. It's going to be incredibly dark in Kherson. Most of the electrical grid was knocked out by the Russians in the retreat. We can also see them standing in the square again. We can see them hugging each other, of course, with Ukrainian colors all over. We can see one guy holding up a Ukrainian flag. And then in the last picture, we can see some soldiers standing in front of the sign saying Kherson, which is pretty nice. With that, we're now going to be moving back to day 255's news, where we can also see that they got a pretty big freaking flag. I don't even know where in the world they stored this thing, but somehow the citizens of Kherson kept the Ukrainian flag that was like a quarter of a mile long hidden, and now they brought it back out. And so here's the video. And that thing just stretches on down the freaking road. It's great to know they're still having fun with this whole liberation thing. It's no big deal, it's just a liberation. And with that, that's the end of the video. But once again, pretty nice to see that the flag is about a quarter mile long, and maybe that thing is so long it can reach from one end of the Russian deserters that they've captured in a line to the other. Maybe they can hold it for a little bit. Maybe it'll instill some pride in them. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next clip from Kherson on day 255, where we also saw a little bit of the day of the life of the citizens of Kherson after the liberation and how it's gotten a little tough. Of course, once again, credit to Radio Free Europe for providing us with this footage. This man has now become a Disney character. He's like Mickey Mouse or Cinderella at Disney World. He's stuck forever in the spot.
Does that mean he can charge $10 for a water bottle?
You know, that's a great question. I wonder if he can put them on a meal plan. What? You're telling me I can't get chips at 12 o'clock in the afternoon? I'm sorry, sir, but that's the meal plan. But that's not how we eat. Matthew knows what I'm talking about. We saw it happen in person.
Площа Свободи. Тут цікавий такий момент, що окрім того, що люди із українською символікою, вони шукають солдатів, військових, людей в формі, в принципі, для того, щоб перше сфотографуватися, друге автограф отримати. Тобто цікавий такий момент, люди отримують від цього задоволення, емоції, і бійці, мені здається, ніколи не відчували такої уваги до себе, бо більше тут всі поп-зірки точно позаздрять.
All the pop stars will envy them. George Clooney. Screw you people. Man, they're whipping out the toy tanks and everything.
Ми стоїмо на площі Свободи. І раніше для нас це був якийсь пустий звук, а зараз це зовсім інше. Ми чекали ЗСУ так довго. І ми, кажуть так, християни чи Папа Римський так не вірять в Бога, як ми вірили в ЗСУ і чекали їх.
Dang! That was a raw line! Oh my god! I mean, Maddie, that was a pretty good one. She said, Christians in the Pope in Rome don't have as much faith in God as we had in the Ukrainian army. Oh my lord, that was a raw line.
Dang.
Чекали їх.
One of those kids is getting into it.
Ми кожен день виходили сюди всі дні, коли був наш майданчик. До останнього дня, коли нас шумовими, слізоточивим газом, до останнього дня ми ходили з цим флагом тут на площі. Це наша совість, це наша честь.
На моєму фоні розбитий Антонівський міст. Там видно чітко, що кілька прольотів вщент розбиті, розбита переправа, якою намагалися російські війська також рухатися. Ну і зрештою, уже по той бік річки російські війська.
And with that, that's the end of the video. But if this video taught us anything, it taught us that Ukrainian grandmothers can deliver raw lines on the fly. I mean, like, that was probably the most heartfelt line that one-liner I've ever heard anyone give about their faith in the Ukrainian army. And that shows you how much the 7% of the citizens of Kherson that wanted Ukraine to come back really cared for him. And of course, I'm being sarcastic. Really, honestly, probably 93% of Ukrainians wanted the Ukrainians to liberate them instead of having Russia annex them. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from this clip, once again provided by Radio Free Europe, and now towards Chernobivka, where we saw a pretty interesting sight. President Zelensky actually visited Kherson just the other day and was issuing awards and citations to soldiers that had shown valor during the offensive to recapture Kherson. And so with that, here's the video. I'm gonna have to turn this down a little bit because I don't know if that's copyrighted or not. You see the medals being handed out right under the Kherson columns. I was about to say arches. It's not arches, it's columns. What type of salute was that? Anyways.
A little different.
Yeah, I mean, like, he wasn't even done saluting when he was turning around.
That's a nice jacket Zelensky's got.
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, all the uniforms here are pretty nice. One thing that you could notice amongst the Ukrainian soldiers is that all of their uniforms are of the same pattern. Something the Russians apparently still don't understand.
You know, for a minute, I thought the soldiers were giants, but then I realized Zelensky is really short.
Zelensky is a short guy. I think he's like 5'6" or 5'7". I mean, you and me would tower over Zelensky. In case y'all don't know, I'm 6'2", so we would look like giants compared to Zelensky. But still, like, they say big things come in small packages. You see the award still being issued. All in all, it's a pretty nice award ceremony. I would say it's better than the Oscars. It doesn't really take much. It doesn't really take much to beat the Oscars, though. That's like the most stupid thing on TV these days. But with that, it's very nice to see that Zelensky made a visit to Kherson and, of course, awarded and commemorated the soldiers who were involved in the offensive to retake the town and the fighting that had occurred there for nearly 9 months since the very start of the war. And with that, it's now time for us to move out of Kherson and all the way north to where the speech from President Zelensky should be. But we didn't include it in the little, I guess you could say, pins tonight. And so we're going to be going to the office of the president's website and listening to the speech from there. And so without further ado, here's the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Дорогі українці, сьогодні ворог здійснив черговий масований ракетний удар по нашій країні. Загалом 90 ракет. Уражені енергосистема, підприємства, житлові будинки. Та й коли це сталося? Одразу, як в Індонезії завершився перший день саміту «двадцятки», і найбільш помітні заяви прозвучали. Основні зустрічі відбулись. Росії кажуть про мир, а вона ракети у відповідь. Їй кажуть про глобальні кризи, які Росія ж спричинила, а вона іранські дрони у відповідь. Їй 10 пунктів, щоб закінчити війну, а вона по 10 ракет на кожен пункт про мир. О 3:45 ранку сьогодні я приєднався до саміту, щоб представити наші пропозиції, як відновити мир і міжнародний порядок. Світ почув Україну, учасники G19 робили свої заяви. А потім в Москві вирішили, що можуть знову спробувати терором досягти того, чого 9-й місяць не можуть і не зможуть досягти. 15 годин 24 хвилини. Ракета. Київ. І по всій країні. Як ми сьогодні жили? 15:54 ракета Кропивницький. 15:56 2 ракети Кіровоградщина. 15:56 ракета Житомирська область, а ще Франківщина, Рівненщина, Харківщина. 16:29 ракета Кривий. 16:29 ракета Полтавщина. 16:35 знов Житомирщина, Київщина, Львівщина, Одеська область, Миколаївщина, а ще Волинь, Хмельницький, Тернопільщина і знов Київ. Вбиті й поранені люди. Мої співчуття рідним. У багатьох містах і районах нашої країни знову аварійне відключення електрики. Близько 10 мільйонів українців без світла. Найбільше станом на цю хвилину на Харківщині, Житомирщині, Київщині, Львівщині. Львів та деякі інші міста призупиняли постачання тепла. По всій країні проблеми зі зв'язком та інтернетом. Внаслідок ударів автоматика сьогодні відключила кілька атомних блоків на 2 станціях. Це прораховані наслідки, і ворог точно знав, що робить. Ось це відповідь від Росії для Індонезії, Індії, Китаю та усіх інших країн, які говорили про те, що війну треба закінчувати. Росія каже світу, що хоче продовжувати. Відповідь тепер за світом. Тим більше сьогодні сталося те, про що ми давно попереджали. Ми говорили про це. Терор не обмежується нашими державними кордонами. Вже поширюється на територію Молдови. А сьогодні російські ракети ударили по Польщі, по території нашої дружньої країни. Загинули люди. Прийміть, будь ласка, співчуття від усіх українських братів. Скільки разів Україна говорила про те, що нашою країною держава-терорист не обмежиться. Польща, держави Балтії – це питання часу, коли б російський терор пішов далі. Треба поставити на місце терориста. Чим довше Росія відчуває безкарність, тим більше буде загроз для усіх, кого можуть досягнути російські ракети. Бити ракетами по території НАТО. Це російський ракетний удар по колективній безпеці. Це дуже суттєва ескалація. Треба діяти. Я хочу зараз сказати усім нашим польським братам і сестрам. Україна завжди вас підтримує. Вільних людей терор не зламає. Перемога можлива, коли немає страху. У нас з вами немає. Хочу подякувати усім партнерам, які допомагають захищати небо. Зокрема, добре спрацювали сьогодні у нас системи NASAMS. Із 10 пусків 10 влучань. Станом на цю годину збито більше 70 ракет і 10 ударних дронів. Я дякую всім нашим американським та європейським друзям, хто допомагає нам забезпечувати такий результат. Дякую всім нашим воїнам, повітряних командувань, Південь, Центр, Схід і Захід, а також підрозділам протиповітряної оборони сухопутних військ. Дякую усім нашим рятувальникам, нашим енергетикам, які працюватимуть цілодобово, щоб відновити нормальне життя для українців. Відновлювальні роботи розпочались по всій країні. Ми і це пройдемо. Ми все відновимо. Росія протиставляє себе світу. Росія програє на полі бою. Росія тероризує і нас, і всіх, до кого може дотягнутися. Зробимо все, щоб її зупинити. Слава усім, хто захищає свободу. Слава усім, хто працює заради нашої перемоги. Вічна пам'ять усім, чиї життя забрали терористи. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky, and that also rounds out our news segment for the night. We're about to be moving into the question segment where we're going to answer everyone's super chats that have been sent in and as many live chats as we can as well. But before we get to that, I just want to say to all of y'all, thank you so much once again for watching. If you did enjoy tonight's stream, please make sure to subscribe and also hit the thumbs up. We have 2,321 likes right now, and we also have 1,200 votes on the poll that's standing right now. If you hit a vote on the poll, it would also be greatly appreciated by us if you hit the like button. That helps us out a load and helps the Lee Spring Army and the Enforcer channel to reach out to more people and let them know that we exist. Without y'all's help by hitting the click button and also subscribing, less and less people will know that the Lee Spring Army and the Enforcer exists. With y'all's help, more people will know and more people will join and the news will continue to spread. And so with that, I thank you all so much once again for watching, and we're now about to be moving into the question segment and addressing some of our polls. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so we do have, I think, 3 polls to address. So the first one says, do you think an appropriate response to Russia would be to institute a no-fly zone in Ukraine? 66% said yes, that would be appropriate. 16% said I'm not sure. And 17% said no, that would be World War III. Now, the no-fly zone has been something that people have been asking for a very long time. And this might be the opportunity to try to do it. But you know, it has the potential of starting World War III, because if we're actually going to enforce that no-fly zone, that means shooting down Russian aircraft, and that is definitely an escalation. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, that's a tough one, because that would be getting the West directly involved in the Ukrainian war, and that would pretty much lead us directly into the ground war as well. Something interesting I saw, which I wanted to clarify here, because because I'm a bit of a realist. Enigma responded to CA Lags. I don't know what CA Lags said, but he said, no, the Enforcer said earlier that you do not respond if they are only killing farmers and normal people because they don't matter. And that sounds very gruff. That sounds like a very impolite way to put it, but the honest truth is that that's how governments work. If that, in the reference we used earlier, to once again reiterate it, is that Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His death carried a lot of significance because he was a very powerful person within the Austro-Hungarian government that was killed at the hands of an assassin of the Black Hand. That right there, in its own right, made that one death so important that World War I would begin. When people like the teenager and the few people who were killed by the MiG-23 incident in 1983 died, it didn't really matter, because these people were not at the very top of the power sphere where things were being shook if they died. And that's something that I feel like we don't really talk about, and a lot of people kind of live in the ignorance of. is that someone like me, if I died tomorrow, if, like, let's just say a Russian terrorist attack happened in Birmingham, Alabama, and I got blown up by an IED, it wouldn't really matter. I mean, if I just died by accident for some weird reason to some foreign country, not a big stink would be made about it, because the honest truth is that I'm not that important of a person. Really, out of about the 330 million people living in the United States, there are very few people, probably only about 100,000 to 250,000 of us, that would be considered important enough by the government that if one of their deaths happened, we would be going directly into some kind of severe action against another country. That's just the way the world works. Of course, I still think that each of us are equally valuable because I'm one of us, so I'm like, I want to be important, and I want my life to be valued, but in the honest truth of things, on the strategic level and on the geopolitical scale, a single person or two people dying that are just average Joes like you and me, we don't really matter. That's also why whenever a war happens, you'll see average Joes like you and me making up the ranks of the military and going overseas and dying in the hundreds of thousands, because at the end of the day, that's just how the world works. I'm sorry, we can't help it. We all don't get the protection of a president or a secretary of the interior or a Department of State, but that's just sadly the way it is. I hate that it may have brushed you the wrong way, but that's just reality. And so with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right. So the next poll says, do you think the United States is likely trying to convince Poland to ignore the missile attacks? It looks like 44% said yes, USA avoids war at all costs. 22% said I'm not sure, and 34% said no, likely not. USA upholds NATO. Now, for me personally, I think, without a doubt, the USA is behind the scenes trying to convince Poland to brush it off as an accident because we want to avoid war. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's probably what they're doing. But Enforcer, what is your opinion?
I would honestly have to say that's probably going to be the case. One thing that, and everyone's always optimistic. I'm always optimistic. Maybe we'll say something. Maybe send a stern message to Russia and also up our support for Ukraine. I hope that's the end result. But at the same time, we may also see that the end result is that really nothing comes out of it, and Russia really just got away scot-free with killing 2 Polish farmers, and then we continue on business as normal. That's most likely the way that it will go on. But it's really sad to think about it, because, you know, I just got done sitting here and talking about how most of us are expendable. There's probably a couple of people in our live chat, actually, that the government would consider unexpendable, but the most of us, including myself, would be considered expendable. I know a lot of y'all are like, but what? You're the future president of the United States. Right now, I'm an unimportant person. If I became a representative or a senator in the U.S. government, and then the president later on, I would be considered quite an important person. One of the people that, if got killed, the country would go to war over. But right now, I'm just an average Joe. So, going off of that and answering that question again, can you reread that poll real quick, Matthew?
Yes. Just a second. I got to get it pulled back up real quick. Let's see. Do you think the United States is likely trying to convince Poland to ignore the missile attacks?
They probably are for that reason. Once again, they're not going to try and start World War III over something like that. Just because you got to remember 600, 800 million lives in the West are on the line. Are we willing to kill them all over something like this? The answer will probably end up being no. So we'll try and sweep it under the rug. And that may be why we are not really talking about what we're doing with the Polish either, because we're probably telling them behind the scenes to just drop it and let it go, or we're going to do something a little bit stern looking, but it really won't result in anything. And so with that, I hope...
And Enforcer, another thing I want to add is I was discussing it earlier with a professor in foreign policy at the university, and we were discussing how everything hinges on Poland. It's up to them at this point if they're going to really make an issue out of it. It's clear that Russia wants to pretend it was an accident. The United States wants to sort of brush it under the rug. So at this point, it's up to Poland if they're going to make a big issue out of it and bring it to NATO's attention to where they have to vote on something, perhaps Article 5. So the ball's in their court, in my opinion.
That's true. They do have the ability to invoke Article 4, but the question is, can they invoke Article 5? And I think that will, and of course, whenever the United States writes up anything like the NATO Charter, which we largely wrote, the United States is usually going to reserve a bit of the final call for themselves. And so while the Polish will definitely have the ability and the right to call into play Article 4, the invocation of Article 5 and Article 6 will definitely fall within the U.S.'s court. And so while the Polish could make a great stink about the thing, the U.S. could generally shoot it down, push it under the rug, because if I'm remembering the story correctly, the Belgians actually tried to create a pretty big issue about the MiG-23 crashing and killing the kid and the family. But at the end of the day, the United States just told them to shut it, put it under the rug, and that's what they had to do at the end of the day, because the United States made the final call. But at the same time, the Polish will... I mean, hell, if the Polish public is anything to go by, they're going to make a big deal out of this, and rightfully so. And so with that, I hope that answers that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, so for our final poll for the moment, the question is, do you think NATO would be severely weakened without the United States membership? Now, for me, I thought this would be a pretty straightforward one, and it looks like an overwhelming majority said yes, but I saw several people in the chat trying to argue with me about it, which I'm open to hear other opinions, but there's some things that is concrete. Like, for one thing, the United States is the world superpower, and we do control a lot of stuff in the world. I know some people don't like to hear that. Not saying that we basically pull the strings on everything, but we're definitely a major player. It looks like 87% said yes, NATO would be very weakened. 6% said I'm not sure, and 7% said no, NATO would remain the same without. So my thing is this. And it's a small minority, it's not a lot of you apparently. If everybody accepts United States aid, but then they want to turn around and say that the United States is not a superpower and that we could live without the United States, that's kind of being hypocritical. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say the United States is a key superpower. Well, it is the sole superpower of the entire Western sphere. There are a lot of global powers in the Western sphere. The United Kingdom, France, being two of them. The Germans, not so much. They don't have the same kind of power projection as the United Kingdom and France does. Both of those are actually, I guess you could say, really number 2 and number 3. And you can kind of contest which one's number 2 and number 3, because France and Britain economically and militarily are quite similar to each other, but really, that's just up to opinion. However, I would say that if the United States left NATO, that would be the largest blow to NATO that there ever would be. The United States provides most of the economic bulk. The GDP of the United States right now is 23 trillion US dollars. The entire GDP of the European Union is 16.6 trillion dollars. So we outbound the European Union by about like $7 trillion, $8 trillion, pretty much an entire. Well, hang on, let me pull this up. GDP of each country, 2022. Now, let me get these figures up here real quick, because I honestly think so. The gap in between the European Union's collective GDP and the United States' collective GDP is so big that if that gap became its own country, it would be the 3rd largest economy in the world, second only to China. And that's how big the economic gap is. So by economic power and I guess you could say sway alone, the United States is definitely up there. And here's one thing I got to say, though. We always are asking, that poll was an interesting one. We're always asking questions like that. The point of the questions, and I think a lot of people are missing it, is not to try and make Europe seem like they're insignificant. Europe is incredibly important to the entire world. And say what?
I said, of course.
And the Europeans are also the 2nd largest economy in the world by continent size, second only to North America. For that reason, they are strategically important. Not only that, the land they cover, the land they possess, is also extremely important as well. However, when you also look at something else, like, for example, the collective size of a, let's just say, what is the size of the EU military? Now, that's a kind of a charged question, because the European Union does not have a collective military. But if we look at the number, the entirety of the European Union has around 1.4 million active personnel in it. If we pull up the U.S. military size, we can see that the United States in 2021 has 1.4 million members, and a single nation in the NATO alliance has the entire power behind it, as the rest of the NATO alliance does without the United States. We account for 50% of NATO's military might, and over half of their economic might as well. And so by that reason alone, if the United States left NATO, It would be a massive economic deficit. It would also be a massive defense deficit as well. Not only that, the United States has, I believe, around 80% or 85% of NATO's entire nuclear arms arsenal. And so, by those three measures alone, we make up a very critical part of NATO's defensive structure, and a lot of our bulk and weight. Now, one thing I do have to say, though, and there's a lot of people who are very proud of their countries in Europe, and I would have to say, by no doubt at all, y'all should be proud of y'all's countries. They're great countries, great economies. They're just great all around. But one thing I do have to say is that the United States, whenever anything happens in the world, the whole world, the Western world, looks at the United States because they are the major player. You know, you have to put the entirety of the European Union together to just end up being $8 trillion short of the U.S. economy. And that right there tells you that's why the rest of the world looks at the United States to make a decision, because we're the ones who have the money, the I guess you could say the elbow grease to get things done at the end of the day. And so with that, if the United States did leave NATO, they would end up severely crippling the alliance. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well. But still, I did see in the live chat that some people were taking that the wrong way. That's not supposed to be taken as Europe is inferior or Europe is stupid or goofy or anything. A European military, like the British, which, believe it or not, man, the British Army is only 79,000 large. There's only 79,000 active, active personnel.
I definitely know.
In the British Army. They're still they're still top notch. Like, don't get me wrong, the British Army on the squad and company level, well, hell, even the battalion or division level, is toe to toe, maybe even a little bit better than the United States, because they have a fairly decent budget for such a small army, and they're able to field them quite effectively. We've seen that across the world. Wherever the British have gone, they've done as good as the United States, and even sometimes a little bit better. And that's just one example.
And also, Ukraine has proved that you don't have to have a massive army and most expensive equipment to be a successful military. They've proven that.
Yeah, and so while America is a very important part, the European countries, all of them, which are very different, varied from nation to nation, economy, military to military, they all add a very important part to this alliance. And without the European portion, there wouldn't be anything to have NATO for. If Europe wasn't a part of the picture, NATO wouldn't exist. The United States would just be in North America and really tend to its own business. And so for that reason, the Europeans are important alone, because they're the reason the alliance exists. But with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well, and I hope no one got their feathers ruffled in a bad way. It wasn't meant to have a question raise feathers in a bad way like that. And so with that, we are on to the next one if we have one, and if not, on to the questions.
All right, so before I get to the questions, now that we have listened to the speech, I'm going to return to what I was going to say earlier. So, something that rubbed me the wrong way just a little bit. Zelensky is a great leader, but I think his statements regarding NATO, sort of encouraging them to go to war over Poland, I think he might have stepped over the line with those statements. And Enforcer, I was wanting to get your take on that.
I don't really think he stepped over the line, because we don't really act like we've stepped over the line whenever we tell the Ukrainians that they should fight till the end, and we continue to give them arms and support. So I don't really see that. Don't really feel that way. I think honestly, hearing his remarks, they're really the remarks we want to make. We know that the situation will pan out to be different, but considering that in his shoes, he's fighting the country that is currently accidentally flung missiles into Poland, I can see where he's coming from for a good bit.
See the way I took it is it sounded like Zelensky was encouraging NATO to respond strongly to what Russia might have done with the missiles in Poland, and that would result in World War III. And it seemed, I can understand why Zelensky would push for that for his own reasons, but at the same time, Ukraine is not yet a NATO member. So to me, it seemed like his statements could have been a little misguided, or at least he should have refrained from saying them. It's fine to think that, but it seemed to me it might have been crossing the line a little bit.
And not really to me. I honestly, I didn't really see anything wrong with it. I thought that they had a lot of consolatory words as well to the Poles. He was telling them to hang on, don't be fearful. We've been dealing with it for a while. We sympathize with you all. Just hang in there. Don't be afraid of these thugs and bullies. They've been doing this forever. Now they're trying to do it to you, and we all stand together. I honestly thought it was a pretty good message. But with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well. And we are going to move on into the question segment.
All right, so let's see here. Moving on to our first question, we have a $100 super chat from Walter A. Lakota Jr., who says, Aloha, Enforcer Matt, and LSA from OG Ellison Boson. It seems AFU is doing a draw and quarter tactic by making a larger army small.
Lager.
Making a lager army small. Looking at the map, it seems that Russia general in Ukraine has two decisions to make. Either defend the western flank or eastern flank, ?
And thank you so much for the support once again, Walter, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I have to agree with you. It seems like the Ukrainian armed forces are making a longer army small. I had to pull out the picture to play the pun. But getting back, and thank you once again, but getting back to the seriousness of the question, correcting the typo, which I love the typo. I thought that was a good one. But anyways, the Ukrainians are cutting the Russians down to size. I think that's something that's incredibly smarter than the pull off. For sure. There's no reason that they shouldn't try and cut down the Russian army. It helps them to push forward, and especially when we see them knocking out a BTG's worth of force per day in the Russians, completely exhausting a BTG, forcing it to be retired from the lines or to be completely reinforced with green soldiers and old aging equipment. That is certainly helping out the Ukrainians to push the Russians backward to hold the lines where they are. And so I would certainly say that they're doing a draw and quarter tactic, and they're chopping down the Russians to size nearly daily at this point, which is a huge attribution to the reason why they're holding out to the front line so well, and also why they're able to push the Russians out incredibly well. Moving on from that, looking at the map, it seems that the Russian general in Ukraine has two decisions to make: either defend the western flank or eastern flank. And I would agree with that as well. I honestly think that if it comes down to it and the Russians have to lose a limb, they're going to be more than happy to lose the DPR and LPR and also the rest of Luhansk to defend the southern portion from Mariupol to Novokakhovka and down towards Crimea, because strategically, Crimea is going to be far more important to the Russians in the long run than the northern area is. And if they ever come to a peace agreement where they're able to hold on to anything, Crimea is the most important thing to hold on to. And in 2014, that was the entire reason why the little green men popped up and started to annex Crimea and also the Donetsk and Luhansk areas, is because the Russians wanted to keep their basing rights inside of Sevastopol port in Crimea. And so they most likely will decide to defend the eastern flank near Kherson and also around Melitopol, because in the end, that defends Crimea, which is really what the entire war is being fought for. And so with that, I hope I answered that question fairly well, Walter, and thank you so much once again for being a longtime member of the Lee Spring Navy. And that's what the LSN stands for, Lee Spring Navy. Maybe we'll have a Lee Spring Marine Corps in the future, in LSMC. That would be kind of cool. And there's a lot of Marines in here, so maybe y'all like to pioneer that one day. But with that, thank you so much once again, Walter, for the support. It helps this channel to keep on running, helps us to keep the lights on in the background, and without viewers and supporters like you, it wouldn't be possible to cover the news. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope you enjoyed that logger, and with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, real quick, I saw a viewer tell me that there's actually something out about world leaders holding an emergency meeting right now. So I was trying to see if I could find that. And sadly, it looks like, I hate to say, the only source that I can find it from is CNN. So take it with a grain of salt. The headline says, world leaders hold emergency meeting as Russian-made missile kills 2 in Poland. So I'm not really sure exactly what that means, but it sounds like it's a meeting of the world leaders. So that's different than the Poland Security Council meeting. So, Enforcer, maybe you can find some more info on that, or maybe we can just wait for more detail.
I think we'll have to wait for more detail on that one and try and report on that tomorrow, so that we can allow the news to flesh out the best we can. Because right now it sounds like there's a little too sparse amount of news to really report on it well.
All right. So, have you answered that question in full?
I did.
All right, so moving on to our next one, we have a $25 super chat from Team Koji17, who says, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, what are your thoughts about the blackouts in Moldova due to Russia's attacks in Ukraine?
I really think that they're more so collateral. It's most likely not the intended effect. It's just a collateral consequence of what's going on in Ukraine. It does start to draw Moldova into the issue. I don't think the Moldovans will create too much of an issue, and once again, they can probably buy electricity from other grids, probably the Romanian grid, or I guess you could say really the Western grid as a whole at that point, considering Romania is one of its furthest east extensions at this time. And so I think it's unfortunate. Sadly, while that does affect civilians in Moldova, and, well, really citizens of Moldova and the entire country, there's really not a lot that that can be done. And also considering that the war is still grinding on Ukraine, it's just really, I just got to be honest, I just kind of view it as collateral, an unfortunate collateral of that, but one that will still occur nonetheless. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and I thank you once again for the support. But sadly, I don't really think there's a lot that can be done about power grids that are being affected as, I guess you could say, a secondary side effect of what's going on in Ukraine. But with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope I was able to answer that question fairly well. Also, Johnny C is hopping on the LSMC train immediately, and I like that. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
Right, and real quick to address the poll that I put up a while back, the question is, do you think Zelensky went too far regarding his statement encouraging NATO to war with Russia? It looks like 59% said no, his statement was just fine, 17% said I'm not sure, and 25% said yes, he should have refrained. Now, we've already gone over where we stand on it, so it looks like between the I'm not sure and yes, it's almost close to 50-50. But unfortunately, do you have anything to add?
I would have to say I still think the statements were okay. I don't think there was really much that was out of line on it. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $25 super chat from Garrett Lowe, who says perhaps a consequence of this missile attack should be modern Western aircraft, armor, and missile systems for Ukraine. Russia's supremely messed up here, and we should throw the floodgates open for arms shipments.
And thank you so much for the support, and I entirely agree for that. If we find and we say that the Russians were responsible for this missile attack in Poland that ended up killing 2 people, I think that ought to be the catalyst, not for us to go directly into war. I believe it ought to be the catalyst for us to start providing everything to Ukraine without limitation. And really, what base could the Russians argue against that on? There wouldn't really be any. So I think that we should start sending tanks, probably M1A1s, most likely. M1A1s that could have a Tusk package, maybe. Leopard 2s. Leopard 2s would be a great addition to the Ukrainian army. Probably pretty easy to learn on, considering that the Russians have, the Germans have shown that they are able to train Ukrainian crews incredibly well on the Panzerhaubitze 2000, and so we know that they'll be able to train them incredibly well on the Leopard 2 as well. They also provide tech support on the Panzerhaubitzes, and if that's expected with the Leopard 2s, they might do quite well on the lines. We could also send them aircraft. Of course, we went over those earlier. The F-16, in my opinion, would be the best to send. The A-10... and you really have to send that thing over with the whole package. So, yeah, that's a tough one. Bradley's, I actually saw Michael Mervrosh in the live chat say Bradley's. Bradley's, I believe, would be one of the best things to send over. They are far better than the BMP-2s that we largely see the Ukrainians and the Russians using. These things are incredibly effective. With TOW-2s or TOW-2Bs equipped to the side of the turret, along with a 25mm Bushmaster and enough carrying capacity to carry about half a squad of men, this thing is quite the knockout. On top of that, it's a pretty good recon vehicle as well. It does everything quite well. And if you've watched the movie Pentagon Wars, you probably hate the Bradley, but I actually found out that the guy that they based the movie off of is a lunatic who believes that the M113 should last until the end of time. And so that completely discredited the guy, because anyone who thinks the M113 is still slightly competent in the modern world must be stupid. And so the M3 Bradley, I certainly think, ought to make it to Ukraine. So you made a fairly good point there, and I would agree with that completely. And also someone else said, no limitations? Yes, no limitations. Of course, I'm not saying send nuclear weapons. Now, that is a limitation, but I feel like that's a common sense limitation. But everything beyond nuclear weapons, we ought to be throwing out on the table. Except for things that might threaten national security. That's another limitation. The no limitations thing does have limitations, but with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, because I agree with you completely that we ought to start sending everything we want to at this point without any regard for what the Russians would say or what they would threaten to do. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And Enforcer, do we have a plot twist here? I thought this might have been a troll saying it earlier, but it looks like it's actually confirmed by the AP about 3 minutes ago. 3 U.S. officials said preliminary assessments suggest the missile was fired by Ukrainian forces at an incoming Russian one amid the barrage that came in on Tuesday. So, obviously preliminary, that's the AP.
Does that come from the Department of Defense?
3 U.S. officials.
And who are these officials? Are they representatives? I mean, you know, they could be people from the Environmental Protection Agency for all you know. You know, it's like we need.
Oh no, you got me on that, but AP is usually pretty reliable.
Let's see. Don't see anything glaring out at me on the Department of Defense website. But let's see here. We can today live. Maybe it'll be under live events. Okay, not.
And of course, it's preliminary. It says here, so take everything with a grain of salt. But that's what they're saying thus far.
Could you throw that link over to me on Discord?
Yes. And it's going to be in the 4th paragraph.
All right, so let's check this out. Warsaw, Poland, Russian-made missile fell, killing 2 people. Said it was unlikely. It was fired from Russia. The blast, to see very significant escalation, but the key, let's see. 3 U.S. officials said preliminary assessments suggested the missile was fired by Ukrainian forces at an oncoming Russian one amid the crushing salvo against Ukraine's electrical infrastructure Tuesday. The officials spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter publicly. Based off of that, and one thing I gotta say is that that doesn't really prove much at the moment. If they had to say something out anonymity, and we have no idea who they are, they may not even be in the Department of Defense. You know, they could be anyone from anywhere. They could be from the Park Service. So until we actually get some kind of clear statement from the Department of Defense, which are usually ones to deal with these kinds of matters, I would take this with a grain of salt, because this is a lot like what we used to see earlier on in the war, where they said anonymous sources in, you know, the government say that Ukraine will fall in a week, or something similar. And this may be the case. It may have been a missile that veered off course from Ukraine and landed in Poland, but coming from anonymous sources, I don't know. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a super chat from David Malone, who says, glad to be able to finally support again. A reminder to send money to United 24 to support the UAF. It seems like the missile may have come from Belarus, was a Ukrainian anti-aircraft.
And thank you for the support. And also, you are correct. United 24 is one of the best fundraisers ever, and we actually do support it. It is a safe fundraiser. Sadly, we cannot run one on YouTube Give. However, if you do want to support the Ukrainian government and help them to continue on the fight and support them through really just straight up monetary support that they can use however they need to, whether it be for the economic side of things or the military side of things, we do have a link in the description below to United 24 where you can go and support them. Also, the other thing, we don't really know where the missile came from. Sadly, we don't have enough information to tell whether it came from Belarus or all the way across Ukraine from Russia or even from the Black Sea. We don't really know. We can't really tell. But one thing that is very interesting to me is that it landed 4 miles into Poland. Now, let me see this. Does the S-300 self-destruct? Let's see here. We need to find some information about how it works. Specifications. Other missiles, mobile center. Let's see here. They launch straight upwards. The missiles are steered. Sections, blah, blah, blah. What about? Driving in Luton says the S-300 does not self-destruct. And I think I'll have to take your word on that because we can't really find any easy information to find on it to get a clear answer. So with that in mind, it may be a Ukrainian S-300, but I did look at a picture of debris that was on the ground, and I think that would also be important to get is some kind of picture evidence of the debris, because some of the pictures that were taken and lined up with pictures of debris from caliber missiles in Kyiv way earlier on in the war showed that some of the pieces were almost a near match with the fittings, the shapes, and so on. So I don't know. It may have been I have a feeling it was, of course, a Russian missile for the most part. It may be, there's a very small chance that it could have been a Ukrainian missile that misfired. If so, an unfortunate incident. But nonetheless, pretty interesting. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, big shout out to Will for putting in a $15 donation. And Will, thank you very much for that support. And he did not leave a comment, but we do appreciate it very much. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Oats Air, who says, take a question from the chat. Slava LSA and Slava Ukraine. Oklahoma stinks and Texas rocks.
And thank you so much for the support, Oats Air. And we will make sure to get a question from the live chat. Also, you and Psyops one day are going to break each other's noses in this live chat, and I can't wait to see that happen. And so with that, what's the live chat?
And the live chat goes to the Greenlight 777, who says, should we be sending our Patriot missiles if the attack in Poland turns out to be an intentional Russian strike?
If it was, I would say yes. I would send in Patriots. I would also send in Abrams tanks, of course, with crews to train the Ukrainians on them, and probably try and see about sending over some F-16s. And so, to answer that question, in a large package, yes, I would include Patriots as well. Probably a limited number of them at the start, though. Probably around 3 or 4 of them. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support, and a pretty good one. But the short answer is yes, I would send them over. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a super chat from Snoozy or Snozy Green, who says, let's go, people. Hit the like button like crazy.
Let's go! 100 laughing face by face. Hit the like button and subscribe. Yeah, I agree with that. It helps us out a whole load, and of course, it helps the Lee Spring Army to grow. And thanks to y'all, we've always been growing the Lee Spring Army. We're about halfway to 108,000 subscribers already, and so each little bit y'all help, each little like button that you click, each little subscribe button that you push, it helps us to get closer and closer to becoming an indomitable army. And so with that, thank you so much for the support and also plugging the like and the subscribe button. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from the B Knight 3, who says, the last mounted cavalry charges of the 21st century were against Soviet tanks. Do you think the one foggy morning will see armored horses overrun a Russian trench line? The wings of hussars ache to fly.
And I thank you for the support, and I don't think we will ever see cavalry in war again. It's completely dated at this point. And interestingly enough, a lot of people thought that the cavalry had died in the First World War, and they kind of did. But they would survive on a little bit, and we did see that the Poles actually pulled off a couple of successful cavalry charges against tank units, forcing the German tank units to retreat from the field due to the cavalry charges, and also the final cavalry charge anywhere in the world was pulled off by the one and only United States. It wasn't actually pulled off by the Poles. It was pulled off by the U.S. in 1942. Let me see if I can pull it up. U.S. cavalry charge. World War II. I believe it was in the Philippines. It sure was. And this was the final cavalry charge in history. Was it really a cavalry charge? And, you know, if you think it has to have sabers in it, no, because they were mostly using 1911 automatics. And in case you were wondering why I called it an automatic and not a semi-automatic, by the Army manuals of the time, it was called an automatic. So it is an automatic. But anyways, these guys are the last ones to pull off an actual cavalry charge. It's unbelievable to think, Matthew, that it was less than 80 years ago that the last cavalry charge was pulled off, because you think of that of being something that would occur in the early 1800s for the most part, but still, they pulled it off successfully in 1942 against the Japanese, which is just, it's just crazy to think about. But anyways, I thank you so much for the support. The Winged Hussars, also, if you don't know about that, to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, the Winged Hussars were Polish cavalry during the time of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and they had probably some of the coolest armor that cavalry ever wore. They had these large metal, well, not metal, wooden canes that jutted off the back of their armor, and on them, I believe it was either swan or goose feathers, and it gave them the appearance of being a winged hussar, and that's where they got their name, the Winged Hussars.
Interesting.
And also, another cool thing, these guys, the Winged Hussars alone, would come to save the day at the Siege of Vienna. The Siege of Vienna was being pulled off by the Ottomans against the Viennese defenders, and they were almost about to give. In fact, the Viennese were so depleted that they actually sallied forth from the walls of the city and were going to engage with head-on fighting against the Ottomans. The winged hussar, and they were about to be wiped off the field if the battle had actually gone on without reinforcements, but right at the nick of time, tens of thousands of winged hussars came over one of the fields far out in the reaches of the city, nowadays is in the middle of the city, came rolling over the top and forced the Ottomans into a rout, defeating the Ottomans at the siege of Vienna and resulting in a Viennese victory, mostly due to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth providing the winged hussars. An incredibly cool story, incredibly cool cavalry as well, but sadly, like everything, they would disappear to the pages of history, but I really like them. Another thing that I like from them, and it was a little bit inspired from them, was the lobster pot tail helmet. Now, let me see if I can find
Rock lobster.
Rock lobster. The lobster pot tail helmet, or the lobster ponytail helmet. These things were used a lot. What the hell? It pulled up every picture but the one I was looking for. Hang on. These things were used a load in the English Civil War. And these things are super cool. I really like them. They've got this neat neck guard. It's literally like a lobster tail, and that's where it gets its name from. But it's a super cool helmet. I love them. And if you ever watch any movie or see any depiction of the English Civil War and English Civil War cavalry, usually both sides use this thing. And I just find them to be super cool. It's a really neat helmet design. But with that...
Fascinating.
Damn, son, where'd you find this? But anyways, with that,
yes.
I hope that addresses a comment fairly well. Thank you so much once again for the support, and allow me to go down a cool rabbit hole about cavalry a little bit. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and just a heads up to everyone, we do have about 37 super chats left. So up next, we have a $10 super chat from Royd Droid Void. He says, Slava Ukraine, keep up the good work and please answer an interesting question from the live chat.
And thank you so much, Rob Void Doid?
Roy Droid Void.
Roy Droid Void. That is one hell of a name right there. And we will make sure to answer a live chat in your honor. And so with that, what do we got?
The live chat question goes to Bip, who says, if NATO doesn't want to react to missiles on Poland, Russia must be classified as terrorist land. You cannot send missiles wherever you want with no consequences.
And of course, it's a fairly good point, but if it's proven that the missiles flew over accidentally, or if it's not even a Russian missile, what if it's a Ukrainian one? We'll just have to see. Honestly, at this point, I'm going to say we're going to wait for more news to come out on it and then circle back to it because we don't really know what this investigation will conclude. But I have my own feelings. I feel like they're most likely Russian, even if they try and say they're Ukrainian. They'll say it's Ukrainian and go, oh, that was an unfortunate misfire. The missile just veered off course after trying to intercept a Russian missile and exploded. It's very sad. And that's probably what they'll say and do because it really gets everyone out of a bad bind. But with that, we are on.
Zelensky wouldn't go for that. He'd be there'd be a large outcry about that.
Maybe, but with that, we are on to the next one.
So up next, we have a $10 super chat from Hiller, who says, longtime viewer but first-time supporter from Vimsy, Estonia. My name is pronounced like healer in English. Just in case you mispronounced it, it might happen, and yes, it did happen. I will donate my question for live chat.
And thank you so much for the support. Also, I love the name. I don't know if I'd be able to pronounce it the first try, but I like it. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And in your honor, we're going to make sure to answer a live chat. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so the question goes to Star Paladin, who says, would this not be the time for the U.S. to beef up Poland's missile defense, and for that matter, Ukraine? This response would not attack Russia directly.
Reread that one again for me real quick.
Would this not be the time for U.S. to beef up Poland's missile defense, and for that matter, Ukraine? This response would not attack Russia directly.
That would be a pretty good move, especially for the Polish end. And it doesn't even require giving the missile batteries directly to Poland. U.S. forces and NATO forces in general can move into Poland freely. And so we could just send our air defense systems attached to the army to hang out in Ukraine or with the Marines, to just hang out in Poland and just wait for an incoming missile to shoot it down. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up Next, we have a $10 super chat from Carson Larimore, who says, it looks like the Russians mistook the tractor as Ukrainian farmers stealing another tank.
Ooh. And I mean, maybe. I mean, you know, that's something that I wouldn't doubt the Russians doing. The Russians don't really have a lot of intelligence. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And that was actually a pretty good burn. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
Next, we have a $10 super chat from Tremaine Pryor, who says, if NATO waits till it happens again, it may lead to collapse of NATO itself, not being able to protect its own borders. If someone violates those borders, they should be punished.
And I thank you for the support, and I agree with that statement. One thing though is that it kind of depends, because the instance we're looking at right now isn't that major of a one. And while it is still heinous and requires some kind of response, we may want to make sure that our response is incredibly measured, because once again, 600 to 800 million lives are on the line. There are, just think of yourself and multiply yourself by 600 to 800 million, and if we pull the wrong move, we could get all of those people killed. So we want to make sure to try and do the best thing we can while not ending the whole world in the process. But I still get where you're coming from, and I do agree with the sentiment. And so with that, thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and real quick to address the poll, it's been up for about 8 minutes now. What do you think on the preliminary report that Ukrainian missile might have hit Poland? It looks like 49% said let's wait and see, which I think is the best option out of the three. 31% said it, likely not credible, and 21% said likely credible. So interesting results, kind of what I've expected to see on that poll. Enforcer, do you have anything to add?
I would have to say it's pretty proportionate of what I'm thinking at this point. I would have to say we're going to wait for more information, which we have said. And my general inclination is to say it's probably not credible, considering that they're not even naming off who these people are. And I actually, real quick here, when I actually had 3 anonymous sources tell me today that the Ukrainians will actually be pushing straight towards Kursk. And how can y'all prove that's true? Because I'm not naming the sources, and, you know, can you give us names? No, I can't. But there's 3 anonymous sources that told me that we would be pushing towards Kursk. And there's not really any credibility to that statement, because no one really knows who the anonymous sources are, and there's not really a lot to back it up. So, in my opinion, if it's an anonymous source, and there's not really a lot of hardcore evidence than just word on the street is, I don't really go with it. And so with that, I hope that addresses the poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from Salty Iguana, who says, after almost a year of aggression, we know Russia's intentions and methods. NATO needs to respond.
And thank you for the support. And I would say NATO does need to respond. I think the best way for us to respond is to heighten the amount of forces in Poland by a drastic number, and also provide air defense systems to Ukraine and on the Polish border as well, so that way we can hopefully shoot down and intercept any kind of missiles, rockets, bombs that are making their way to a Ukrainian city or to a Polish one as well. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Carniv Talonhawk, who says, suss it out. If it was Russian strike in Poland, then NATO need to at least set up no-fly over NATO areas. Slava from Aussie and Raj the dog. My dog, by the way, you seem to think talking about Ukraine dog.
Oh, and I thank you for the support. And I think we've actually mistaken your dog for a Ukrainian dog before. And also, could you reread that one again real quick at the very beginning, Matthew?
He said, suss it out. If it was Russian strike in Poland, then NATO need to at least set up no-fly over NATO areas. And then he said, Slava from Roger the dog.
And I would agree with that. No-fly zones over NATO areas. Well, generally, I feel like that would be a bit redundant, because it would be a feel-good measure, yes, but the NATO areas are already a no-fly zone to any kind of Russian aircraft whatsoever. If they incur on NATO airspace, we have an obligation to shoot them down already. So it would kind of be redundant in a way, but I do understand the sentiment. I back it up completely. It's good to know that they already do that right now, and hopefully they'll enforce it if it's ever tested seriously. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, and also Thank you so much for watching and being a part of the Lee Spring Army, along with Ratch the Dog, which is one of the Lee Spring Army dog members, the LSAD members. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Terrace Kulik, who says, I'm American, but was video chatting with my cousin from Turniphill today. His son is a decorated Su-27 pilot. When the air siren started, he was scared and he hung up. He gets 6 hours of power a day at least now.
And thank you so much for the support. And also, that is incredibly cool to hear. And the Su-27, while I usually trash on a lot of Russian stuff, the Su-27 at least has some very... Not the Su-25, no. The Su-27 has some very nice, sleek lines to it. It's a cool-looking jet. You can't really argue with that. That is a cool-looking jet, for sure. And also, I have a huge soft spot for it because... when I first got DCS World, this was the only plane I had, and so it's the only plane I know how to fly on there, and it is pretty neat. Funnily enough, years ago when I actually got DCS World and played it for a little bit, it was a little bit too difficult for me. I didn't have enough time to actually learn it. I actually flew the thing in the Ukrainian colors because it was the only way the Su-27 could fly with the United States in-game. So I was like, well, I want to be on the American side, so I'll just take the Su-27, put it in Ukrainian camo, and it'll throw me over there. And so, funnily enough, I was flying around a Ukrainian Su-27 in a game before this war even happened, before 2014 even happened. But with that, I thank you so much for the support and also sharing such a cool story with us. And also, I have huge respect for the pilots because even outnumbered, they still take the skies each and every day and shoot down missiles, aircraft, and sometimes shaheeds. We've rarely seen that, but they have done it before. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Aram. I do not know how to say that name. I can't even begin to pronounce it. But you know who you are. Thank you very much for that support. They say, if Russia actually has functional nukes, why would a conventional war go anywhere other than nuclear in the same day?
Well, because it wouldn't happen instantaneously. Because the first thing you got to remember is that there's always room for diplomatic negotiation, and as long as there's room for that, the nukes will not fire. So the war would most likely go on for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, because the Russians would be seeing, and the West would be seeing, if there could be some way to create a status quo antebellum, which in in simplified terms, that means to bring everything back to the way it was before the war until the nukes fired. There's always a chance for that, and so until that opportunity is completely exhausted, the war would drag on for a couple of days, if not weeks. We could also see that the Russians may not fire the nukes at all. Of course, with Putin at the helm, I would highly doubt that idea. But the Russians may not fire the nukes at all. The West may win, and because they have nukes, the surrender that the Russians would give would be conditional. It would not be unconditional, because unconditional means that they would lose all control and authority to do anything, and the West could do whatever they want. A conditional surrender, however, would mean that the Russians could maintain their governmental integrity and probably the integrity of many other institutions in their country, but also concede defeat in the war. So it would not go to nuclear war within hours, because that means that they would not have tried a diplomatic solution beforehand, which will always happen because no one wants to have the entire world destroyed and probably die in the process as well. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Cliff H, who says, for hitting Poland, NATO should take out a few Russian installations in Belarus as a proportionate response and deterrent after warning Belarus to keep their people clear of all Russian equipment.
Wait a minute, he's saying the Russians do that?
No, NATO should do that.
I was about to say, I was like, damn, I was like, I don't think they're going to do that. But if it was the West doing that, and that does start to get in some nasty gray areas as well, because Belarus is a member of the CSTO, and if Russia decides to uphold that, the CSTO is very similar to NATO in some ways, with a very similar charter, and so that could invoke the Russians into a war with the West because we attacked Belarus, and also that would also threaten Russia's strategic position in the center of Europe, I guess you could say, hell, I don't even know how to describe that, because this is Eastern Europe. But from north to south, Belarus is in the center of Europe at that point. So I hope that addresses that question, that comment fairly well. And thank you once again for the support. Also, another thing, I saw someone put, let's see, Robin M said the antebellum South and started talking about slave plantations. One thing I like to say, though, is that you see antebellum mentioned a lot in the South because antebellum, it's Latin, antebellum. That means that it was before the war. That's the actual direct Latin translation of antebellum. So whenever you hear of anything in the South being referred to as an antebellum thing, like the antebellum way of life, or an antebellum plantation, it's always, that literally means a pre-war something, and it's always referring to the Civil War. So that's why that's why antebellum is used a lot in the Southern United States, because it's always talking about the way the South was before 1861. And so with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well. I hope that I hope that educated some people as to why that was used and why it's always used in the South. But you can really use it anywhere. You could even use it in World War I. You could say antebellum Europe or antebellum Germany before World War II. It's an easily used term. It just means before the war. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Stephen L., who says Artemis 1 is set to launch tonight at about 1 a.m. Eastern. Do you think this is going to kick off a new space race? And Stephen, do you mean a space race with the private industry versus the government, that type of space race?
Well, let's see, Artemis 1. Oh, really? Oh my God, they're finally doing it. I can't believe it. They're finally going to launch this stupid thing. I remember I was in, like, 2nd grade, and they were talking about this thing. They had the design and everything. And now, finally, at 20 years old, like, 14 years later, I'm finally watching this thing getting ready to launch. I gotta be honest with you.
It's, again, a mission to the moon?
Let me see what the Artemis 1 mission is. What will Artemis 1 do? It'll put the Orion spacecraft through its paces, testing its solar power, propulsion, navigation, light support system before we return to Earth on December 11th, and a 25,000 mile per hour plunge back into it. Well, where is it going? That's why I want to know. Where is it going? Okay, so it will be orbiting the moon, according to this graphic here. And let's go to the NASA website. Check this out. So all it's doing is recreating, I guess you could say, Apollo 9. And it's just going to be testing out the craft and making sure they can carry people to the moon and back. I gotta be honest with y'all. While the Starship program is starting to fall behind a little bit, and we haven't seen that final orbital flight test, in terms of payload carrying ability, NASA is starting to fall far behind its competitor, which is really just SpaceX. Blue Horizon isn't even in the equation because that thing can't do anything but lift one guy into suborbital trajectory. But SpaceX, if they're able to get the Starship running, and it's actually functionable and it's economical to use, the Artemis program is obsolete before it can even do anything. But that's entirely dependent on if Starship is ever able to actually fulfill its contracts. But still, I mean, that's pretty wild to think that tonight, the Artemis will be launching off a capsule that will go and orbit the moon again. That's actually pretty cool. But with that, I thank you so much for the support and sharing that with us, because I didn't even know that was happening, and I've heard about this for a while. And also, in case you all didn't know, a decent amount of the Artemis 1 was actually designed in Huntsville at the Redstone Arsenal. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for letting us know.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Taras Kulik once again, who says the response to that Poland issue should not be Article 5, but should be to give Ukraine Patriot missiles and F-16s that we are retiring anyhow and lock down Ukrainian airspace. That's what to do now.
And thank you so much for the support, and I would agree with that statement. I think if we find out that those are Russian missiles, we should up our support to Ukraine and start sending them those big-ticket items. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from KG, who says, I see a lot of cavalier attitudes towards nuclear World War III. It's the end of civilization, and many, many people will survive to die of starvation. Watch the movie Threads to understand what happens after.
And I thank you for the support, and I thank you for bringing up the most realistic movie and the most realistic depiction of what a nuclear holocaust would look like, which is Threads. Threads doesn't hold back any punches, unlike a lot of American movies that do. They actually make the situation as bleak as it would be. And I think that's a very important thing to remind people. There is no happy ending with a nuclear war. Yeah, a lot of people will survive. It's estimated that in the United States, almost 2/3 of the population would survive a nuclear onslaught, but oh man, I mean, that doesn't even touch the surface, because while 2/3 of you survive, the entire electrical grid has been knocked out. The entire United States runs on electricity. The entire modern world runs on electricity. If you irreparably knock out the electrical grid, you're starting back off at square one infrastructure-wise. You're starting off at square one industrially. You have to go and recreate the wheel. You have to go and reinvent the steam engine. You have to work your way back up towards electricity, start reproducing all of the equipment you would need to actually make electricity a nationwide phenomenon again. That would take decades, if not a century, to do again. And that would be hard. On top of that, imagine the ecological damage that would be caused by the amount of radiation that would be emitted into the atmosphere, also the atmospheric disruptions that would occur because of it. It would be a terrible time. And also another thing that they believe would happen, and of course it's very hard to tell because it's never actually happened, is that if a nuclear onslaught occurred, the upper atmosphere would pretty much cease to exist. And so UV radiation would start flooding through to the actual surface of the Earth, killing off a whole bunch of animals, killing off a whole bunch of vegetation, and not only that, but causing people to get cataracts so quickly without eye protection that people would practically be blind if they didn't have some kind of eye protection. So it's a horrendous thing to think about. That's why whenever it actually comes to that point, I'm always like, man, you know, you got to think, and I'm always stressing it heavily on stream. You know, your decisions right now, you know, may seem like it's the right thing to do, but you got to think 600 to 800 million people in the West alone could be killed. Who knows how many people would indirectly be killed in Africa, South America, and Asia because of what happened in North America and Europe. And so with that, I hope that answers that comment fairly well. And also, thank you so much for calling out Threads. If you haven't seen that movie, go check it out. It's bleak, it's depressing, but it's realistic. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
All right. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Anthony, who says, Enforcer, did you know, like Germany, Austria was divided up by the Allies and Soviets after World War II until 1955? Great jobs on the videos and streams. I've been watching since day 115. You got my vote for president.
Hey, thank you so much for the support. And also, let me check that out, because Austrian, like, oh my god, that's wild. Okay, hang on. I'm going to be honest with you, because I'm not going to act like I did know this. I actually didn't know that Austria had also been divided up into occupation zones as well. Wow, that's something. I didn't know that. That's so freaking cool. And then they divided up Vienna just like they did Berlin. Cool. I gotta be honest with you, you just taught me something. I didn't know that they partitioned Austria as well. I thought Austria was just reintegrated, I guess you could say, back into the West, and they just became an independent country. That's so freaking cool. I thank you so much for the support and sharing that with me. And I'll now have to look into that a little bit more, because that's something I didn't know. And something else I just learned recently is that, well, I won't go over that. That's a massive rabbit hole, and we're probably running out of time. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Opus, who says, Russia has become more and more aggressive towards its neighbors. Ukraine war, and the Russian flyby with tactical nuke into Sweden airspace pushed the country toward NATO. Hence, Sweden apply.
And thank you for the support and also sharing that with us. And I didn't hear about tactical nuke flying anywhere near Sweden. But if that was the case, now I can see why they were joining. But as far as I knew, Sweden and Finland were joining because they were scared that the Russians may try to pull similar tactics that they pulled on the Ukrainians with them. But with that, I thank you so much for the support and sharing that information with us, if that is true. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, big shout out to Ole Wilansky for putting in a $10 super chat. He says, hopefully we can have an actual day off one day. I can't even imagine how it could happen, the end of this war, but I'm sick and tired of being outraged. I still have faith in humanity, especially LSA.
And thank you so much for the support and also for your faith in the Lee Spring Army, because one thing I've learned is that the Lee Spring Army is something I can count on daily to be a inspiration. A lot of y'all are very interesting and very nice people and very cool to talk to and know. And I also feel the same way about the Lee Spring Army. Now, to move on to the other part, I hope that the war ends soon as well. I'm tired of seeing it. And while it's pretty much been the only thing that this channel has ever covered since most of y'all have been watching, it becomes horrendous to see. I saw today horrendous sights like every day. You know, it's like I say that like it's a special day. I see it every day. Saw people flattened on the road. A Ukrainian tank had driven over a dead Russian guy, and he was flattened like a pancake, and his intestines were all over the road. Saw some guy with half his head blown off again. I mean, I see that stuff every day. And while I've really gotten to the point where it's just like, you know, it's just is what it is, it still, you know, you sit there and think about it, you're like, dang, you know, that's what happens to hundreds of thousands of people every day that this war goes on. Hundreds of Russians, hundreds of Ukrainians, hundreds of Ukrainian civilians. And you sit there and think about it, and you're like, that's just jacked up. And war is a terrible thing. Now, one thing, and this is something interesting, is a little bit of a interesting mix. This whole entire channel exists because of the war, practically. We cover the war every day, but war is one of the most terrible things, one of the most unimaginable hellscapes and nightmares that mankind has ever seen, has ever made. And I gotta tell you, one thing that this war has taught me is that if I ever became president, now I wouldn't be a coward and I wouldn't let people shove around the United States, but you can see why the United States tries to avoid war the best it can, because the horrendous things that happen at the end of the day are scarring, to say the least. You can only imagine how scarring it is to the people who are actually there. It's scarring to me just to see it on film. And so with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from White Lightning 777, who says NATO should attack the Kerch Bridge to retaliate because Poland was bombed. 2 missiles are not accidental.
And thank you for the support. And that may be the reasoning that Zelensky was using there. And 2 missiles does seem to be somewhat deliberate. However, one thing I was thinking is that we usually see missiles fired off in batteries, these cruiser ballistic missiles, and so the Russians could have calibrated both of them to the exact same incorrect coordinates, and like we saw in Kyiv, it could have been a double tap on the same target, but the coordinates were wrong. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well, but I will agree, 2 missiles seems to be highly suspicious that it would be just a coincidence or a misinput. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And next up, big shout out to Roberto Marquez, Urban Ghost Hunters, and also William Jones for each putting in a $5 donation, but without a comment. But thank you all 3 so much for that support. It does help us to keep us running, and we do appreciate it. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Laszlo, who says, let's see here. I'm not sure what is meant by this, so hopefully it's not bad. Putin's head is made of BM. Please take a live chat question. Thank you, and Hiram Slava.
And thank you for the support. I don't know what BM is, but I'll take your credit for it. It must be made of it. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, and let's hear a live chat.
The live chat goes to Urban Ghost Hunters, who says, wasn't this missile attack done with cruise missiles, precision guided by GPS, and extremely accurate within feet?
Yes, it was. But one thing you have to remember, though, and this is one thing that we did mention earlier, is that it could have been the fact that the coordinates were misinputted. That's why both of them hit the same spot in the same part of Poland. And I think at this point, that would be the most logical explanation. Also, Matthew, that does throw into play and into question how in the world 2 Ukrainian missiles, apparently S-300 missiles used to intercept Russian surface-to-air missiles, would have landed in the same spot twice. That would seem very odd for missiles at that point that would have completely lost their guidance and tracking because there was no target that they were following anymore. They were just free-floating through the air. For both of them to land in the same spot, that would be like lightning hitting the same place twice within seconds.
So what are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that I'll probably have to keep with the idea that it is definitely a Russian missile because, like, think about that. Really think about that. That would be like Well, and let me put this into, this isn't an exact comparison, but that would be like a Shahed 136 flying in. You pull out an AK and you fire at it as it's moving. Okay, and so the bullets are missing. All right, let's just say you fire 2 of them and they both miss. They're both going to land in different places. They're not going to both land in the same spot on the same part of the ground. You know, but these 2 missiles did. You know, and S-300s, you know, once they lose their target, I'm assuming like most missiles, they really just lose what they're doing. They don't really have a tracking, I guess you could say a tracking guidance or anything like that anymore. They just free fly. And so the idea of 2 of them landing in the exact same place, one after the other, seems a little bit outlandish. It seems like that they would have landed in separate places instead of the same spot.
Maybe so, maybe so. I was just looking around a second ago. It looks like also Reuters has picked up the story we were talking about earlier as well. So to me, I'm starting to think maybe it wasn't Russian. You know, we kind of went through that scenario earlier. Who could it possibly been? And there's only a few options. So, you know, if it was something from Ukraine, I would lay odds it was an accident. They were trying to shoot down a Russian missile of some sort, and something went wrong. But you're saying the missiles were the highly accurate GPS coordinate type?
Yes.
Huh. I guess we'll just have to wait for more detail.
I'm going to be honest with you, even if the official statement says that was a Ukrainian missile, I think that might just be a way to try and sweep it under the rug, because once again, that makes no sense. You know, that's like, it just doesn't make any sense. Nothing in the world, when fired, lands in the same spot.
I think, though, if it turns out that that's the United States trying to explain it away, I think we'd see Zelensky come out and detest the statement by the United States. So I'm sure Zelensky will make a statement about it if that becomes the official narrative and it's incorrect.
Well, I mean, I don't know, because, you know, rocking the boat like that could lead him high and dry without any support, so he might just have to accept it and go with it and just push it under the rug and just keep going, because if they say it was an accidental missile by the Ukrainians that landed in Poland, nothing's going to happen to anyone. The support's going to keep flowing to Ukraine. It'll just be an unfortunate incident. The Polish will go, you know, hey, we understand your plight. You know, it's just an unfortunate accident. Really, nothing could be done, and everything will continue normally. And he might just have to eat the pie and just keep going. You know, I don't really think he would come out and say anything against it directly, but, you know, you never know. Maybe he will. But with that, we are on to
telling. One thing is for certain these days, you can't tell who's telling the truth anymore, because we know Russia lies like crazy. We also know the United States tells some lies here and there to be strategic. It's just hard to tell what's truth and what's not these days, so we have to take everything with a grain of salt.
Perhaps, and of course,
yeah, definitely.
and I saw someone say, "Oh, here we go with conspiracy theories." And I'm not one for conspiracy theories. However, it does seem quite odd with all the information we've already gotten straightforward. It just doesn't really seem like it's adding up. But we'll have to still wait and see. But with that, we are on to the next one. Also, how many do we have left, Matthew?
So we have, let's see here, 10 left.
All right. So with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Secular Sakai, who says military response is needed. Close the skies and end missile terrorism in Ukraine and Poland.
And thank you so much for the support, Secular. And I would have to say that I would certainly agree with the idea of giving Poland air defenses, or at least deploying the U.S. Army in Poland with proper air defenses there. One thing that I'd also agree on is sending air defenses to Ukraine. That would definitely help them out just in the day-to-day fighting of the war, and also help them to hopefully try and intercept these missiles before they made it into Poland, if that was the case. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And also, Matthew, real quick question before we get off stream. Have you noticed that when we're drinking out of those plastic water bottles, like the last swig of water just tastes like chemicals?
Yeah, it does. Like, and if everybody knows what I'm talking about, I guarantee you right now, that Dasani water tastes like straight up dirt. If you go to a store and you look at all the bottled water, everything will be gone except for the Dasani. It'll be sitting there in like crates of it. And we stopped buying Dasani a long time ago, but that water just tastes nasty.
I gotta tell you, I mean, like, I've got to be serious with you. I feel like the back of my throat has been burning slightly all night long after drinking that freaking water. And you know, we got our own things at home, you know, like, and I'm drinking bottled water for a reason. Matthew knows the reason. But that was just gross. I drank that, like, the last drink of water, it just tasted like straight up plastic and broken dreams. And now for the whole stream, and that's why my voice hasn't been feeling that great. It's burning a little bit in the back of my throat, and I'm not feeling that grand over it just in the voice. And so with that, we're gonna keep on going, but I just had to say that because because if I die from drinking a Kirkland purified water, that's what happened. So with that, we're on to the next.
You can't bash the Costco water though.
Hey, well, listen,
that's my favorite.
Costco makes killer pizzas, like little cookable pizzas in your oven. They do the best at everything. But that water right there, I think that's going to end up killing me. I think that stuff's got I don't even know, cholera in it.
It's leaching.
Yeah, it's a leachate. It's not leachate. It's leaching. But with that,
leaching.
We are on to the next one.
All right, so up next we have a $5 super chat from Chronically who says the S-300 was likely a Ukrainian missile that missed its target. And that's funny you mentioned that.
And I thank you for the support. And it may have been. However, I'm still highly reluctant about that because all the facts we've gotten, well, at least the information we've gotten, doesn't line up with that. But still, there's a chance, and I'm not going to rule that out until the cows come home. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. And thank you so much for the support, and also throwing in your 2 bits as well. It's been a very interesting topic to discuss, to say the least, really. But with that, we're on to the next one. And thank you once again.
Up next, we have let me Stugna a bot real quick. There we go. Up next, we have a $5 super chat from the Pick Rookie, who says, "What's the chances the rocket was targeting the Rezhal Khmelnytsky power line?" And it's somewhere in Poland. I recognize the name, but I can't pronounce it.
Can you reread that one again?
What are the chances of the rocket targeting the Rezhal Khmelnytsky power line? Rezhal Khmelnytsky power line, something like that.
Highly unlikely, because from what we know, the missile landed somewhere around here, right here, and that I don't think is close to the power line you're talking about. I might be wrong though, but it landed somewhere around here. And this is also incredibly odd because if you look at it, there's nothing here. I mean, like, there is nothing here at all except for these villages. This looks like almost like a collective farm. Then again, Poland was communist for a good while, so it may actually be a collective farm right here that's now turned village. But there's nothing here, and that kind of reiterates to me again that it seems as though it may have been a misinput in the missile coordinates. But once again, I'm not entirely sure. But with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Molaski80, who says, in Herzon video of the airfield, who or what do you think was the story of that BTR? It had a Z on it, but it was also in Ukrainian camo, captured then destroyed, question mark.
I would most likely agree with that story. It looked as though when we were watching it, that it was a Ukrainian BTR at one time. It was captured. The Russians, of course, painted their Z's on it, and then it got destroyed at some point at the Chernobyl airfield, and then they just dragged it over to the side and left it there to rust. So I would largely agree with that story. We don't know the exact one, but I feel like that's about as good a shot in the dark as any. And so with that, thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $3 super chat from Alan Sanderson, who says he's not napping, he just got demobilized.
Hey, and I thank you so much for the support. That's actually a pretty good one. Demobilization, yeah. Maybe he's taking a nap while doing it too. Of course, why not both? Why not have your cake and eat it? I don't understand that stupid phrase. Maybe no one else does either. You can't have your cake and eat it? What the hell's the point of getting the cake if you can't eat it? Like, that's the whole point of the cake. You're eating cake. Why not have your cake?
The cake's for somebody else. So you can have the cake, but you can't eat it, but you got to save it for somebody else.
No, because the saying
I just made that up.
Oh, I was about to say, man, because I was like, the saying is you cannot have your cake and eat it. Why the hell not? It's your cake. That's what it's for. It's for you to eat. Like, that's like...
It's that communist cake.
That's that silly business stuff about the phrases that make no sense. Like, till the cows come home. When do they come home? Like, most people don't even have cows. What am I supposed to do? Wait forever? You know, like that's usually a definitive amount of time. If you're a farmer, the cows are coming home by dusk. But for people like me who have no cows, that's never. Like, what the hell do I do? Just wait until I get a cow and then it comes home? Like when is that too? If I take it back home at 10 o'clock in the morning, is that when the cows come home, or is it dusk like the farmer? I don't know. Like, that's just stupid stuff.
Wait a minute. Is it this straightforward that I haven't understood the entire time? You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you eat it, it's gone, so you can't have it.
What?
Is it that simple? Is it really that simple?
Oh, someone said you eat the cake, you no longer have it. But
dang, this entire time, I thought there was a deeper meaning to it. I didn't think it was like that straightforward. I'm baffled. I'm dumbfounded.
I'm actually baffled. You have made me feel like an idiot. Thank you, folks. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, so up next, we have a $3 super chat from Ivan Diablo, who says, did you see the 30-plus billion support of Ukraine today by Biden?
I didn't. I'll have to go and look at that again. I thought it was actually like 400 million, but I'll make sure to take a look at that and see if that's the case. If so, I think that's the largest package we have ever seen. And so with that, I thank you for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. Hear that all again.
Robin M puts in a $5 super chat and says, I find your existential way of reporting war a relaxing reality. I know that sounds weird.
All right. It looks like it's reconnected. Oh, thank God.
Hello?
We're scared there. Hello?
All right, so I completely lost you there.
All right, so I got to tell you, Matthew, I really hate the internet. I really do. We need to find a way to fix this problem because it's not getting better. But anyways, moving on from that, and getting on back around to the question, can we hear it again?
Did you see the 30-plus... Wait a minute, hold on, that was a different one. Hold on. It was from Robin M, who said, I find your existential way of reporting war a relaxing... I know that sounds weird.
And also, now I remember, thank you so much once again for that. And it seems like a lot of people enjoy the way we cover the news. I'm glad that people do. And it's interesting to me because I never really thought about it being existential, but I suppose it is in a way. But still, I thank you so much once again for support. I'm really going to have to think on that comment because I'm like, is it really existential? I'm going to have to really think deeply about that. And so with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you once again.
And up next, a big shout out to Dupper Bob, Dubsy Dabster, and Homer Lap for each putting in a $2 super chat without a comment. But we do appreciate that support as always. And thank you all for being longtime channel viewers. And Enforcer, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
It sounded like you were going to say something.
Yes, I was. I was going to say thank you to both of y'all so much for y'all's support. Because without y'all's support, we're not able to run this channel. And so, of course, I guess you can put it in a way as it's pretty much just saying, without y'all, we can't be here. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again to both of you.
And the final one of the night here, we have a $2 super chat from CA Lags, who says, now can the U.S. declare Russia a terrorist state?
I really honestly, I think we could months ago. I gotta say, the one thing I will say clearly about our government is that was a bad move not to declare them a terrorist state. It was unanimous at that time that everyone said they were a terrorist state, but for some reason we didn't do it. I'm sure everyone can agree with me on this one, that was a dumb move not to do it then. I still think that we could call them one now. Even without this happening today, I still think we could have done that. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so moving on to our live chat questions here. Up first, we have our Morse code decoders of the stream, WFTU, CFA, BME, Mark Hodges, and also Draconian, who say, Enforcer, the telegraph message tonight is, quote unquote, the Russians will soon get what they've been asking for. ...
And that is correct. They are going to get what they're asking for soon, and it's going to be a bloody nose and a knuckle sandwich, which sounded really cliche. But with that, I thank y'all so much once again for deciphering that Morse code message. Y'all have been doing it for ages, and y'all still at it. And so that, thank you once again, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a question from, let's see here, Happy Dragon, who says, Enforcer, does Russia have anything like an Iron Dome? Would it be fairly easy to hit their main infrastructure in Moscow?
As far as I know, they don't have anything similar to an Iron Dome. I believe they have nuclear missile defenses around Moscow in a ring, but beyond that, they don't really have anything at all, really. So I would say it'd actually be quite easy to hit Moscow as long as it could travel across the ground at a fairly low level. But with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. And also, Matthew, I saw you got rid of someone who I saw for the whole night was just hung up on a poll that happened 2 hours ago. And I was sitting there, I was like, man.
They couldn't let it go. They could not let it go. And I had an honest conversation too, but they couldn't stop hurling insults. So sadly, they had to go.
And you know, that one right there, I was sitting there and watching it. And I was like, why? I was like, why are you keeping this going? I sat there and even gave Europe a whole load of fair credit. I was like, you know, fair credit, they're incredibly important for A, B, and C, you know, as important in some distinctions as the United States, you know, and then gave the U.S. credit. And, you know, it's, I don't get it. I didn't get that at all. Like, you know, like what am I supposed to say? And let me just be let me just be completely frank here and not try and go about this diplomatically. Does anyone say when anything goes down in the world, let's go and look at Austria? What's Austria going to do? No, they don't. They go, what is America going to do? You know, like,
yes, yes, they do. Where do you go for the money?
I don't mean to say that frankly, and it's not supposed to be meant as rude, but like, come on, I got to use common sense at the end of the day. It's a logical thing. Yeah, whenever you sit there and something in the economy happens, like the stock market plummets, you don't go, oh no, what's Sam going to do, the manager of the local department store? No, you don't. You sit there and go, what's the CEO going to do? Because the CEO is the one who has all the pulling power over the company. And like, that's just the way it works. I can't help it. At one point, everyone looked at the British. Before the United States, it was the British. And everyone went, oh, God, what's the British going to do? Or what's France going to do?
And also, the enforcer of the catch is, I'm not saying I'm against the United States, you know, giving out aid to other countries. I think we should. Like, for example, Ukraine, we're doing the right thing by funding them. But what I'm saying is we have to at least get recognition while we're funding all these different countries for being the world superpower. Otherwise, we're being hypocritical.
But, well, I mean, like, you know, to me, though, you know, it's like, you know, people can complain all they want. At the end of the day, it's all part of the same sphere. You know, we complain about the government here at home. But, like, you know,
that's normal.
That's part of running the whole system. If you're the guy who's in charge of everything, you've also got to be the one dishing out the cash. And I think there's a huge disconnect in the United States with that. You can't be the US of A, propping up the entire Western world and also not pay a dime for it. It's going to be costly. The British learned that a while ago, and that's the reason why their empire collapsed, is because they were running the whole entire thing until the United States took up the bill. That's just how it works. I mean, you know, and I hate to, you know, I'm sorry, you know, if it offends you that your country isn't at the top of the heap right now. There will be a time probably in the future. We'll probably see that the Germans, you know, well, hell, in 150 years, the Germans might be at the top of the heap, and Europe and the United States might be an entirely separate sphere of its own. The United States The United States might decline and collapse in the next 80 years or 100 years. Who really knows? You know, at one point, Rome was on top of the world. Where are they now? They're nowhere. It's just how the world works. Right now, the United States is at its prime. You know, and a lot of people always argue that. People have been saying that since the 60s, that the United States is in decline and dying. I hate to tell y'all, it's at its prime right now. The thing's going pretty strong. It'll probably keep on doing that for the next 100 years, at least. And then eventually...
Wait, you said the United States?
Yeah, the United States will probably maintain its strength and power over the Western world for about the next 100 years at least, and then beyond that, well, I mean, you know, everyone's always going, but think about it. We went through the Civil War, which is a lot worse than anything that goes on now, and we survived, and we also survived through World War II. We survived through a million things. The United States has seen a lot worse than what anything's going on right now. We'll continue on. We'll persevere probably for another 100 years, and then we'll finally start going through the decline. We'll probably end up like the British, honestly, and then someone else in the Western world will have to step forward and take the reins. I don't know who it'll be. To be honest, right now, it seems like the Germans would be the next ones. But, you know, right now, that's the way it is. I'm sorry, you know, like that. I can't sit there and ignore facts. That's just how the Western world works. Much like if you look at Asia, and you look at anything going on in the southeast of Asia, you don't sit there and go, oh, what's Cambodia going to do? No, you go, what's China going to do? Because they're the ones over there that are kind of running the whole boat. So with that, I hope that gets through that. And we're on to the next one.
All right, so up next we have a question from James, who says, why not Poland send one missile back to Russia as warning?
That's, I mean, you know.
I mean, it's a valid point,
it's a
but I
good
think
point.
that'd be more than a warning, I think.
It would, I mean, hell, that might be war, but I mean, I get the point. That's a fairly good, you actually got me stumped right there because I don't really know how to respond to it. It's a great point. I like the point, but at the same time, it would start a war. So with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, so up next, we have a question from Paul Kirill, who says, I think NATO should give Ukraine a very large donation of equipment in response to the missile attack. What do you think?
I think we honestly should. I mean, there's no point that we shouldn't have given it already. I think right now is about as good a point as any to send some over. And also, if we want to avoid, let's go off the story. It was an accidental missile from Ukraine, an S-300, that somehow glided over the border into Poland, and then 2 of them struck in the same spot, killing 2 people. Well, we could probably avoid that by sending them NASAMS, because instead of using a somewhat ineffective S-300 system, now you've got the almost entirely efficient, almost always hitting NASAM defense system. You avoid the problem right there. So I say we ought to still. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. So up next, we have a question from Portstan, who says, question for Enforcer, politically, wouldn't it be a good thing for Putin to give up to NATO instead of giving up to Ukraine?
It wouldn't be, because giving up to NATO, you got to understand Russian culture here. And we're about to go down. How many super chats do we have left, Matthew?
So we're in our live chats, and also I just noticed we're well over time.
Wait a minute, we've been in our live chats?
Yes.
I didn't even know. Anyways, to get to this one, because this one's a really good one, you have to understand Russian culture and what's prevailing right now in their culture. Right now, the Russians view the West as demons. They view us as demons. All of y'all, they view as sickly, demonic people. And so any kind of bending to the West is considered weakness, is considering selling out the Russians and selling their souls, pretty much. And so giving up to the West would be a lot worse than giving up to Ukraine, because at least in Ukraine, you could kind of get away with saying they're a little similar to us. At least it was just our, because the Russians at the end of the day, while they view the Ukrainians as third-class people, they're still very closely related culturally. And so they go, okay, well, we just lost them. I guess we can kind of forgive and let go, all that crap. But with the West, if you lost to the West directly, oh my God, you've just lost to Satan, in their mindset. And so they'll be freaking out. It'll almost be like the Germans after the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, I believe. They would never recover. They would go into radicalism and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'd honestly say it'd be better for them to surrender to give up to the Ukrainians than it would be to give up to NATO. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And considering that we've been running massively overtime, we've been having so much fun tonight, we didn't even realize it. We're going to answer one last question from the live chat. And so who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that person is Linda Vickers, who says, do you think that the CIA and other intelligence services can find out where the people that give the coordinates for the missiles are and Putinize them, i.e. fall out of windows and down the stairs?
The CIA could probably do something like that. The CIA is quite scary in what they can do, at least what's been declassified, what they have done. It's really crazy to see what they were capable of. In case y'all didn't know, in Afghanistan, it wasn't really the army that secured Afghanistan. It wasn't really the Marines, or really anyone for that matter, that secured Afghanistan, the military. It was the CIA dropped off in helicopters with briefcases of money that pretty much secured Afghanistan for the rest of the military to roll in. If that doesn't tell you what the CIA is capable of, I don't know what does, but they're quite a nutty group. I think the CIA really would be capable of something like that. Honestly, that's child's play for an organization like them. And so they could probably go and find these people and have them snuffed if they wanted to. And so with that, I hope that addresses the question fairly well. And with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much once again for watching. It has been an absolute pleasure running tonight's stream, and I hope you all have enjoyed covering the news as much as I, and I hope you all have enjoyed the question segment as well. If y'all are new to this stream, and y'all have gotten all the way through the question segment, then y'all must really enjoy this thing. And if you do, make sure to hit the subscribe button and also hit the like button on the stream. Both of those things help out this channel a lot. It helps us out in the algorithms, because the algorithms works off of likes. They actually, and to real quick go through this, and for all of our purposes, Matthew, we're pretty much done for the night, but through the algorithms, YouTube actually bases a lot of how much they promote videos off of the enjoyment that viewers get off of them. And so if you hit the like button, it actually shows that per viewer percentage-wise, that y'all are enjoying a video a whole lot. And if y'all are enjoying it a whole lot, other folks are going to be enjoying it a whole lot as well. And that keeps people on YouTube... Say what?
Facts.
And that keeps people on YouTube a lot longer, and that's what YouTube wants, because at the end of the day, they profit off the time y'all spend on here. And so if y'all hit the like button, they're like, oh crap, people like it, let's send it to other people. And so they show it to more people, and then more people watch it, and then they hit the like button, and it keeps on growing. And then YouTube's happy because people are on YouTube and they're watching videos. Also, Matthew hit that facts, and I was like, oh my god. The first time I only heard like that, and I was like, what? But anyways, hitting the like button helps out. Also, hitting the subscribe button also helps out a lot, because if and it works almost off the same system as likes. If you subscribe per viewer, and we get a certain amount of subscribers per amount of viewers, it tells YouTube again that the content's so enjoyable, people are subscribing to watch it again. And so that keeps people on the platform longer, and so then they promote the content more. And so by hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe, getting through all the mathematical equations and now algorithms and stuff I just told you all about, y'all actually help us to be promoted to more people and allow this news to spread out to more folks. It also allows us to expose ourselves and what we're doing, and also the fundraisers as well, which helps out in all ways in the end. And so with that, I hope y'all enjoyed my little spiel about how the algorithm works in a little bit of a way, and that's why we're always telling everyone to hit the like button and subscribe at the beginning of the stream and the end of it. But with that, I thank you all so much once again for watching, and I hope y'all have a great night, stay safe, and I'll see you all tomorrow on day 267 of the news of the war in Ukraine. Good night, everyone. Take care.
Slava
Stay
Ukraine.
safe, and I'll see y'all then. And also, Slava Ukraine. Yeah.
Yes. The Leaf Street Army sends its regards.
Ще не вмерла України ні слава, ні воля. Ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми, браття, козаки. нашу свободу і покажем, що